listeners, and welcome to the Weekend Report with the Weekend Vigilante. I am your host, Sheila Zielinski, teaming up with the Hagmanns for this Saturday, August 16th, 2014 edition. We have a very powerful program tonight, folks. Joining us this first hour is our guest, Dr. Chuck Baldwin. You know him as a prolific writer, renowned conservative pastor, and highly acclaimed radio talk show host. He was the Constitution Party's presidential candidate for the 2008 election. He strongly opposes the New World Order, the UN, U.S. income taxes, the Patriot Act, and assaults on individual liberties in general. He strongly supports the gold standard, the right to keep and bear arms, homeschooling, and pro-life legislation such as the Sanctity of Life Act. He's a man of God on a mission, and he's a 1-2 punch to the Luciferian elite. He's my kind of guy, Dr. Chuck Baldwin. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, Sheila. Great to be on your show. Thank you for letting me come on.
Well, Chuck, we have a fantastic and very robust audience tonight, and one of the things our newer listeners may not have heard, and I think it bears repeating, months back you wrote a scathing article how today's preachers have become all but neutered and how Christians should not obey. And even though you've long maintained that abject apathy and indifference with today's churchmen is ubiquitous, you went on to say that they're absolutely committed to not being involved, and in fact said it was much deeper than apathy, it was apostasy. And after you wrote your article, your email inbox and mailbox were filled with rebukes from pastors and Christians. When you read asinine statements like, if federal agents or troops came to my house and put my wife on the kitchen table and raped her, Romans 13 tells me I could not interfere. If government forces came into my home intent on harming my wife and children, I would not resist. America's founding father were rebels against God. They had no right to fight a war for independence. Subject to a king, even a tyrannical one, is God's will. Anyone who resists civil government is going to hell, and much, much more. Chuck, as I was reading your summary of the replies, I personally couldn't even believe what I was reading. I was absolutely shocked at what I was reading. How stunned were you, Chuck, over the replies of so-called Christians?
Well, Sheila, the sad part of it is I'm not really shocked anymore. I've heard these fellows say these kinds of things so often now that I guess I'm becoming a little immune to the shock factor. A few years ago, yes, I found it very difficult to comprehend that anyone, much less a minister of the gospel, could say the things that you just quoted there. And yet, that's exactly what preachers are saying and have said. And I think the problem is even maybe worse than we would like to think it is. I wrote a column this past week, which has proven to be the most read column I've ever written to date. The title is New Research, Pastors Deliberately Keeping Flock in the Dark. I quoted a 2-year research project by George Barna, who looked into the political activity and the willingness of pastors to be involved in the affairs of state. And basically what he found was that 90% of the American pastors know the Bible speaks to the salient political issues of our day, but they are deliberately refusing to address those issues. Now, I got to tell you, when you asked me if I'm shocked by something, I was kind of shocked by that. I've talked to so many of these fellows, and what I typically hear is, well, this isn't, the Bible doesn't really get into this. This is extra biblical discussion, and God hasn't called me to that. I mean, you hear that kind of a pitch quite a bit.
Right.
But Barna's research said, and again, this is a 2-year project, a professional study, that 90% of the pastors admitted that, yes, the socio-political issues of the day do relate to Scripture, and Scripture does relate to those issues, but because they're controversial in nature, I choose not to deal with them. So what we're dealing with is not an ignorant pulpit. We are dealing with a deliberately disobedient pulpit.
And what's stunning is that 90%, according to that article of Americans pastors, say they, like you said, they now know that the Bible speaks to all these issues, but they are deliberately determined to not teach these biblical principles. I mean, that is quite a stunning admission, really, isn't it?
It is. That's part of the survey that did. Some of the other parts of the survey did not, but that was really surprising to me. I was surprised, A, that many of the pastors who took the survey would admit that, and B, that the figure was that high. It really is a stunning admission. And so these Christians out here in the churches that are sitting in congregations where the pastor is not teaching them the truth of these issues, is avoiding them. They have to now understand that this is purposeful, it is deliberate, it is intentional. This is not ignorance, it's circumstantial. There is a deliberate refusal of pastors to deal with the issues.
And not just a deliberate refusal, but apathy and indifference going along with that. I mean, let's take that a bit further. You yourself have said that there's absolutely no doubt in your mind that the biggest reason America's in the mess that they're in today is directly due to the apathy and indifference of the American pulpit. And Steve Quayle has said many times on my show, the silent devils in the pulpit. I mean, weigh in on this, Chuck, because that is pretty staggering. The churches and the pulpit are the ones that should be on the rooftops screaming about these issues, not the other way around.
Well, that's why they're called watchmen. And they're not watching anything, or should I say they're watching everything and saying nothing, maybe. But yeah. Let me give you an example of what you just said, and this will take just a minute to develop. In 1995, a good friend of mine, who was a commander in the Navy at that time, he was stationed at 29 Palms, California. He was the author of what became the famous 29 Palms survey, a survey that was given to the Marine Corps personnel at that time. And it was a lengthy survey. There was, a couple hundred questions or more. But there were 2 or 3 questions in the middle of it that really stunned everybody at the time. And one of the questions was, if you were given an order to fire your weapon upon the American citizen, would you comply with that order? Now, again, this is in the mid-'90s. Back at that time when that survey was conducted, 25% of the Marines said, yes, they would fire on the American citizenry if commanded to do so. Well, now skip forward to last year, 2013. A very similar survey was conducted at the same military installation, 29 Palms, California. And in the midst of the survey, that one particular question was re-asked of the Marines that were taking the survey last year. Guess what the percentage was in 2013? In the mid-'90s, it was 25%. Last year, 2013, same question, same installation, a new crop of Marines. Now, the response was 2/3. 66% of the Marines said, yes, they would fire their weapons on the American citizenry, commanded to do so. Now, here's my point. How could that happen? I mean, how could it be that many young men, Marines of all things, could say that they would fire on the American people? And here's the answer. The answer is because of the silence of the pulpits. It is the pulpits that have created this problem. Think about it. How many of those Marines that took that survey came from evangelical churches? They grew up in Sunday school. They went to Christian youth camps. They went to Christian youth groups. They went to church on Sunday. They had Christian parents. I mean, there's a large percentage of the Christian churches that send young people into the military. I mean, it might be the highest single group that takes young people into the military, or sends, I should say, young people into the military, would be evangelical churches. So you have to know that of those 66% of the Marines who answered that way, that a good, sizable percentage of them were raised in church, and they would call themselves Christians. And yet they answered, yes, they would fire on the American people if told to do so. So this is the problem of the pulpits. You know, we can't blame the schools, we can't blame the government, we can't blame higher education, we can't blame the media. The pastors have the responsibility to teach the moral code of conduct to their people. I mean, that's 101 for churchmen. Now, here we have a generation of young people that have grown up in America's churches. They go off into the military, and now 2/3 2/3 say they are willing to fire their weapons on the American people if told to do so. Okay? Again, that shows you how the churches and the pastors have refused to teach the truth of these issues and the ramifications for doing so.
I mean, Tom Horn and others have said on my program that today's church is just absolutely unrecognizable. As a matter of fact, he said if his parents were alive and walked in a church today, they'd probably try to cast out demons, because it's absolutely just, I'm paraphrasing something you said, but it's so profound, and it's interesting because when you look at the Apostle Paul, especially his ministry, he didn't say, well, we better focus on the prosperity gospel and, how's our attendance and our offerings and our programs, and, hey, wait, what's our building square footage again? I mean, they didn't have stately buildings. They couldn't get on TV and beg like today's telepickpocketists, but they turned the world upside down. These guys in the early church were often in prison and beaten and stoned and starving, thirsty, naked, generally hungry, and compare that, Chuck, today to these fat cats with their big bank accounts and their jets and lavish lasciviousness. It's quite staggering, isn't it?
Well, yeah, in that same survey that you're referring to, George Barna, that I mentioned in my latest column, yeah, we mentioned the 5 points of success that pastors enumerated in the survey. In other words, what are they all about? They're all about success, having a successful church, okay? Well, how do you define success? Well, George Barna asked them specifically, how do you define success? And he gave the results. And basically there were 5 points. And the 5 points were attendance, giving or offerings, number of programs, number of staff, and square footage of the facilities. Those are the 5 criteria that pastors use to determine success. So anything controversial, such as talking about a political issue, that would jeopardize any one of those would cause them to not speak to that issue. And in the same column, that's when I wrote, you alluded to that as well, I compared to the Apostle Paul from 2 Corinthians chapter 11, where he gave what I call his ministerial pedigree. He said, are they a minister of Christ? I more. Okay, so what is the pedigree of his ministry? Well, here's what it was. Stripes above measure, in prisons frequently, in deaths often, beaten with rods, stone, perils, weakness, painfulness, hunger and thirst, cold and nakedness. Not one word about attendance or giving or programs or staff or square footage of the buildings. I mean, everything has been turned upside down completely. And, of course, I think we have these mega-church pastors like Joel Osteen, Rick Warren, Bill Hybels, and these fellas are the ones that have, I think, created this successful church, quote, quote, phenomenon that pastors are driven by today.
I challenge anyone to go walk through a Christian bookstore and ask which ones are the most popular and look at the glossy covers of these 5 steps to become like me. I mean, are you kidding me? You've pastored a 501c3 church. You've got the letters from the IRS. Here's the things you can do. Here's the things you can't. Twice, 3 times a year. 95% of those letters, they're followed to the T by these submitting pastors, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And yes, you're right. I did pastor a 501c3 church for many years. And sometimes 2 to 3 times a year, I would get an information packet in the mail. Usually it would come from a law firm that was working at the behest of the IRS. I can't remember if it actually came from the IRS or not. It may have, but usually came from some law firm. And inside the pamphlet, the material, it would say, since you're a 501c3 pastor, here's what you can do, and then bullet points. And here's what you can't do, and then bullet points. And then here's what the church can do, bullet points, and what the church can't do. And of course, I would just take those things and throw them in the garbage and pay attention to them. and there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of pastors like that around the country that are in 501c3 churches, and they are ignoring these things, and they are speaking out boldly in spite of that. But the problem is they are really a small, very small minority. The vast majority of the pastors, when they read those pamphlets, you're right, they study them and they follow them to a T. And when you suggest that they should speak out on name the issue, and they remember what that pamphlet said that they can and can't do, they will resist totally the suggestion that they should delve into these things, because after all, they don't want to jeopardize their 501c nonprofit tax exempt status.
Here's things you can and can't do, being nice little minions. I mean, the Pharisees wanted to silence Jesus. I mean, it's like the modern-day elitists have taken over, silence the truth. When anyone such as yourself attempts to even encourage our Christian brothers and sisters to resist an unconstitutional or otherwise reprehensible government policy, what do we hear, Chuck? We hear the retort, what about Romans 13? I mean, of course, when we Christians submit to government, I mean, would you agree that for most part, Romans 13 is always their escape clause from responsibility? And this submit to government no matter what, it's a nonsensical interpretation of Romans 13, but it's preached by the vast majority. Would you agree that it's the same devilish doctrine that Hitler promoted during the German church's rise to Nazism?
That's exactly the same. Absolutely, exactly the same. And the thing about it is that it is so antithetical to Scripture. Now, it's like Romans 13, and they use one other one in the book of 1 Peter, and they have created a doctrine around that one passage of Scripture to the exclusion of the totality of the Word of God. That's why my son and I, as you know, Tim's a constitutional attorney, and a couple of years ago, he and I put together a book that we call Romans 13, The True Meaning of Submission, because of this very thing that you're discussing now. We saw the churches relying on Romans 13 as this crutch and this excuse for them never to get involved, and we knew we had to address it from a biblical point of view. So we went into the entirety of Scripture, Old and New Testaments. We looked at the preponderance of scriptural evidence, and we show that from the beginning of mankind all the way through the Old Testament, into the New Testament, all the way to the end of mankind, that never did God ever expect that his children, his people, should submit to the subjugation of tyrants, because, this is what God would have them to do, that they should never resist, never say no to evil, no matter how horrific it might be, because it happens to stem from some kind of a governmental agency. That is so ludicrous. Every authority vested in man is a limited jurisdictional authority. There's only one sovereign in a Christian's life, and that's the Lord God. And when we give sovereignty to any human authority, whatever that authority might be, what we have done, and this is what these preachers have done. Some of them I don't think have realized this, but they have made government an idol. They've literally supplanted the sovereignty of the Lord God with government, because only God is unlimited in authority. He has power and authority over all of our lives, and to him we must give submission. But all human authority under God is limited and jurisdictional. There are boundaries as to what the authority can and cannot do. And when they attempt to go beyond the authority that God has established for them, they then become tyrannical. Yea, they become a god, small g, to the person that they're trying to subject. And to submit to that, for a pastor to say, you must submit to this small g God, is idolatry. I mean, the very first commandment is, thou shalt have no other gods before me. So what these pastors and churches are doing by teaching this, and you use the word devilish, and I would concur with that word. It is devilish. Anytime you would supplant the authority and sovereignty of the Lord God with a small g God, no matter what it is, call it government, call it whatever you want, you are committing sacrilege and idolatry. And that's exactly what is going on when they teach this erroneous interpretation of Romans 13.
Well, and I like what you said about this limits to authority, because, and a good example you've used before is a father and husband has the authority in their home, but doesn't give them the power to abuse their wife and children. You know, an employer has authority on the job, but doesn't give them the power to control the private lives of his employees. and even a pastor in the church. You know, it doesn't give him the power to tell all employees in their personal business what to do. So all human authority, as you said, is limited in nature, and no man has unlimited authority over the lives of other men. And you mentioned something very important when you asked this question. You said, did Moses violate God's principle of submission to authority when he killed the Egyptian taskmaster? Did Elijah violate God's principle when it came to Ahab and Jezebel? Did David violate God's principle? I mean, you can go on and on to Daniel, to the Hebrew children, right to John the Baptist. And when it came to Golden King Herod for his infidelity, did all these Christian martyrs then, Chuck, violate God's principle of submission to authority?
Exactly, and that's why I say whenever they start teaching this, it's lunacy, because if you were to take out of the Scripture all of the examples of stories where the men and women of God said no to some form of civil government, the manner in which they said no is, that's discussion for another day. But they said no. They said no. And when you look at the myriad examples of Scripture that are devoted to that, if you were to remove those examples from the Scripture, I'm not sure what the percentage would be, but I would think it would be somewhere maybe up to 40%, 35 to 40% of the entire Scripture would be eliminated from the Bible when you stop and think about all the way from the Old Testament and the examples of the patriarchs, all the way through the examples that you just used in the Old Testament, and then into the New Testament, John the Baptist. The Apostle Paul himself, the man who wrote Romans chapter 13, spent more time in jail than he did out of jail whenever he was defied.
And Paul actually made it clear that our submission to civil authority must be predicated on more than fear of governmental retaliation. I mean,
absolutely.
Notice he said, wherefore you must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscious sake. I mean, meaning our obedience to civil authorities more than just because they say so. It's a matter of also conscious, wouldn't you say?
Oh no, that's what the Scripture says. You quoted it exactly right. And of course, we put all this in the book. But yeah, that's exactly right. Our submission to authority is not simply because of the fear of reprisal, for the fear of what the government may do because we have violated the law. But it's a matter of conscience in our heart as to what we know is right and what we know is wrong. And when government says that we are to do or not do something that we know in our heart is right or wrong, as the example may be, well, then we've got to fall back to that conscience. What is conscience? Conscience is the response of the heart that is in submission to God. That's what our conscience is. So when our conscience is violated, what that means is the authority and the sovereignty of God is abridged. And so men are saying, these pastors are saying that we're supposed to negate, we're supposed to silence the conscience of God in our heart about right or wrong and submit instead to this small God government. That's lunacy. Again, that's why Paul put it in the text, that it's not merely a matter of fear of reprisal. I mean, otherwise, what you're left with, if you take the other position, if conscience doesn't matter, and if truth doesn't matter, and if the lordship of Christ doesn't matter, and the sovereignty of God doesn't, throw all that out and say, okay, no, what do we have left? We have, Hail Caesar. We who are about to die salute you.
We must think and reason for ourselves regarding the justness, I guess, and righteousness of government's laws. And because let's face it, there are times when civil authority may need to be resisted, either governmental abuse of power or the violation of conscience, or both could precipitate civil disobedience. Well,
and the beautiful thing about, and I think the more damaging indictment against the churches in America today is that we're not under a monarchy.
We're not. There's no king here. There's
no king here. The people are king in America. We are the government. When you dig through all of the fancy definitions, it comes back to we the people. This is supposed to be a nation of, by, and for the people. The Constitution and everything about it was written so that the people would be able to, of their own will, of their own accord, change the government to be able to take out the elements that are bad and add the elements that are good. It was all designed so that it would not be a top-down government, but rather a bottom-up government. So, I mean, this argument about the king, and I know that you hear that a lot, but we got to remember that there is no king here. So when we talk about the what is the powers that be in Romans chapter 13, well, for us in America, basically it's the Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Every person, including the elected civil magistrates, are bound to submit to the Constitution. So when you look at the form of government that we have in America, so you say, okay, so what you're saying is if we are to totally submit without question, reservation, what anything that a civil magistrate might say to us, no matter how egregiously evil and wicked it might be, well, wait a minute. According to our law, the civil magistrate must submit to the supreme law of the land. So who really is in violation of Romans 13 now? Is it the citizen, or is it the civil magistrate who has violated the Constitution? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's no single governing official in the country. America's supreme law doesn't rest with any man or group or anything else. You just alluded to that. I mean, not even president or Congress or the Supreme Court. And as you just said, Chuck, in America, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And under the laws, every single governing official publicly promises to submit to the Constitution of the U.S. But do you think that people understand the significance of this distinction here, Chuck? And why is it that we've allowed our political leaders to violate their oaths of office and blatantly disobey the supreme law of the land?
Well, again, one of the major problems is because they're not being taught it in the pulpits. I would go back to colonial America. What was the difference between colonial America and America today? There's a lot of similarities between that period of time and the period of time in which we're living today. And quite honestly, Sheila, there's a lot of great positive similarities. I mean, there's a lot of positive signs on the horizon here in our country. It's not all negative, and I'm not a doom and gloomer by any stretch of the imagination. And I see a lot of positive things happening. I mean, there are state legislators and governors and attorney generals and courts and so forth that are beginning to push back against the overreach of federal government, especially out here in the West. We're going through a major, I think, revolution, you could say, of independence of state legislatures and so forth that are beginning to stand for the sovereignty of their states, independence of their states, and against the overreach of the federal government. We're seeing people that are running for office today that are, and many of them are getting elected. That we had Ron Paul, was about the only one we had in Washington for how many years, and now we can point to several. We're still not a majority by any stretch, but there's more now in the legislature than there has been in a long, long time. There's a lot of positive things that are happening. But what's the difference between now and then? The difference is we don't have the patriot pulpit. That's what they had in colonial America. You had these men of all denominations that were in their pulpits every Sunday thundering forth these principles of liberty as found in the Scriptures. They were teaching them, explaining them to the people, so that when it came time for us to fight our war for independence, etc., there was no hesitation. They were absolutely prepared in their hearts, in their soul, in their mind, and they knew what they were doing was right. There was no question about it. Why? Because of the explanations, the exegesis, and the extrapolations of Scripture from those Black Regiment pastors. And that's why I've started the Liberty Church Project, and we're trying to get out there and start patriot churches and liberty churches, help people get out of the 501c3 monstrosity and start fresh, independent. And boy, we're having a huge response already from churches and individuals that are wanting us to help them. So, over the next few years, we'll see what happens, Sheila, but I really think that if we don't resurrect the patriot pulpit and the Liberty Church, I don't think we're going to see a solution in this country.
Well, your Liberty Church project is important, and why it's so important, of course, amid the cesspool of these 501c3 churches, pastors are deliberately, like you said before, choosing not to teach biblical truth to their congregations for the selfish goal of being, quote-unquote, successful. And it's time we came to grips with this and acknowledge that these pastors, this is shameless. And I think it's absolutely mindlessness. And, you know, as that article Barna noted, I mean, it's the churches themselves. They've chosen to be separate from the political affairs of the country. You know, I think back to you, and of course you talked about your brilliant son who is a constitutional lawyer. You wrote the book To Keep or Not to Keep, and as we know, the debate over firearms rages, and on the heels, many in government are attempting, as you, of course, know, to pass laws disarming the American people. And your book really aims to equip Bible-believing Christians in America with some really specific tools. Tell our listeners about that and why this topic is so important for Christians, Chuck.
Yeah, thanks, Sheila. Yeah, we wrote Romans 13, the true meaning of submission first, and then when Mr. Obama and Ms. Feinstein a year ago tried to enact that egregious gun control legislation that would have made criminals out of, you know, millions and millions of honest gun owners simply for the type of rifle that they owned, as well as not, you know, putting the gun owners of America into a national database gun registration. It was a Hitlerian, horrific legislation. And during that, when that debate was raging, of course, thankfully, Grassroots America rose up, and they couldn't even get it past the Democrat-controlled Senate, which nobody expected. Everybody thought it would sail through the Senate and the fight would be in the House, but it didn't even survive the U.S. Senate. And that was because of the grassroots American people that rose up in no uncertain terms, let their elected officials know they weren't going to put up with it. But during that several-month debate, what we noticed was that, again, the churches and pastors totally silent, totally, or they were going along with it. You know, well, if the government tells you to surrender your guns, then you should do that. And so we got together, he and I, and we said, you know, we've got to write a book about the Second Amendment and about the right to keep and bear arms, again, from a biblical point of view. And so we just really hurriedly and put it together as fast as we could, while at the same time, you know, really doing the research and making the investigative analysis of Scripture as complete as possible. And we put up, we called it To Keep or Not to Keep, Why Christians Should Not Give Up Their Guns. And once again, we go back and show from the entire body of Scripture that God never, ever did, or much less commanded, his people to surrender their means of self-defense in the face of some governmental tyrant. Never been the case, ever. We go back and we show in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus told Simon Peter to put up the sword. We talk about that. We show exactly what was happening there. We quote Jesus when he said just a few hours before that event, if you don't have a sword, go buy one.
Yes.
Even if you have to sell your clothes to do it. He told the disciples that. They told him, well, right now there's 2 of us that are carrying swords here among the 12. Jesus said, very good. You know, they go from there to the garden. Remember that the Roman sword that they were carrying was against the law. It was against Roman law for the subjected Hebrews in Judea to carry the Roman sword. But they were doing it nonetheless, and Jesus commanded them to go buy one. And note that in the garden, whenever they left, Simon Peter walked out of the garden with his sword on his person. He never surrendered his sword, and they never took it from him. When he left that garden, he left armed. Just one example. You could go through the entire body of Scripture and show how that God has given to us a duty to defend ourselves. It's not just a right, as in the Bill of Rights, as powerful as that is, but it is a duty. God has given us a duty to protect and defend the life that he has given us. In fact, the New Testament, there's a verse that says, if a man provide not for his own, he's worse than an infidel, and he's denied the faith. Well, what does it mean, provide not for his own? Well, it means everything. It means food, it means shelter, it means security. It means self-defense. For a man to not be willing to defend himself and his family is to be as an infidel, and he's denied the faith. So any Christian and any pastor that suggests that a Christian should surrender his firearms at the behest of some tyrannical government, what he's saying is he's asking his people to become infidels. You are removing from yourself the duty and responsibility you have to provide for your family, and you're saying, no, I will not provide. I will not be willing to defend and protect my life and my family. Well, you're worse than an infidel. Even infidels know that they have the duty to protect and defend their lives. So everything about the Scripture is totally contrary to the modern phenomena that we find in our pulpits about laying down your guns if the government tells you to do so. So that's why we covered it in the book. That's why we went into the Scripture and showed it from a biblical perspective why Christians should not give up their means of self-defense.
Why is there so much shoulder shrugging in the American church today, and it's crickets chirping on all the big issues like the NDAA, abortion, the gay thing? I mean, it's okay for ISIS to behead Christian, this butchering of our brethren lately that's just evil incarnate. I mean, what is going on that there's just, the shoulder-shrugging kumbaya group? I don't get that, Chuck.
Well, I think part of the problem, Sheila, is that they're probably too comfortable. I mean, we probably all are, but I think this entire post-World War II generation, now generation several, we've raised more or less in the lap of luxury. We've had convenience and comfort to the point that we don't even really comprehend life without it. And I'm not sure that the Lord isn't going to have to make the church extremely uncomfortable before we'll be able to return to those fundamental principles and duties that we're obligated to. I would hope that it wouldn't come to that, but I'm not so sure that it won't.
I mean, it just seems like, even if I look at a TV lineup today, anything on a primetime station, I mean, Sodom and Gomorrah has nothing on today's debaucherous society. I mean, it just absolutely mind boggles me that anything goes nowadays. And you know what? Just accept everything, take everything. In the end, you always say it really does come down to we the people. I mean, if you want a church, folks, where the pastor is willing to teach the biblical principles that relate to our everyday lives, including our political lives, like you say, you might just have to vote with your feet and go find one. That is the kind of thing that really is important to you too, isn't it, Chuck?
Yeah, and I think that's really where it's at, and that's not a comfortable position. And
no,
I understand that, and I understand the affection that people have for their pastors, for their church family, their brothers and sisters. Many of them have a long-standing tradition in these churches. Maybe they have, parents and grandparents that were, raised there. And I mean, there's a lot of elements that go into where people go to church and the meaning that the church may have in their lives. So I get that. Okay, I really truly do. But at the same time, our future is at stake. Our children's freedom is at stake. And the pastors that are not willing to speak out, whether they realize it or not, they are helping to put the chains of tyranny around the necks of our children and our grandchildren. So for the Christian parents out there who really do care about the future of our country, of their kids, grandkids, etc., and want to see freedom remain in this country, at some point you're going to have to say, wait a minute, this pastor is not helping maintain freedom in this country. This pastor is helping to enslave my grandchildren. I'm not going to be content to sit here in this congregation and give these tithes and offerings to this fellowship and support this ministry as emotionally attached as I may be, realizing that this congregation and this pastor are doing nothing to resist the tyranny that is enveloping our country. And I will, therefore, find a pastor who will fight for the freedoms of my children and grandchildren. I will make the effort And I until the Christians of the country, the ones that are sitting out there in the pews, they know what's right, they believe what's right, in their gut they do. Until they begin putting some feet action in their heart and start looking for churches, supporting churches, the pastors. You know, I know a lot of pastors around the country that are really trying to fight this fight. They really are a bunch of them out there. They're a minority, but they're a bunch of them. And what's the same story do you hear? The Christians pat them on the back once in a while, you know, maybe tip them something occasionally, maybe come by and visit once in a while. You're doing a great job, attaboy. And then what do? They go back to the establishment 501c3, say nothing, do nothing, hear nothing, church and pastor, and that's where they support. That's where they give their tithes and offerings. That's where their kids go to Sunday school. That's where they go to youth program. You know, that's where they support. And the pastors that are out there trying to fight the fight, you know, they're standing there all by themselves with very few people behind them. And that's the frustrating part. So, you know, what I'm saying is, and you said it's we the people, that's exactly right. When we the people decide to get out of these entertainment centers, we call churches.
Social clubs,
glorified social clubs, and get into some real churches with some real watchmen and some real prophets in the pulpit, you know, then you got no one to blame but yourself.
And I get it's hard because the watered-down, lukewarm church abounds, and it is very tough to find a liberty-minded church. I mean, can we turn things around here, in your opinion? I mean, what is it going to take here for the church to grow a backbone here, do you think, Chuck?
I know it would help if the people in the pews that know what's right, if they would do what we're talking about here. Can you imagine, I mean, many of these churches are strapped financially, which is another story, isn't it? But they're in debt. And they're, you know, they a 5%, 7% reduction in income over a period of a few months would seriously do jeopardy to the vast majority of churches. Right now, you know, what's the motivation for the pastor? I mean, okay, he should have courage. He should do right because it's right to do. I agree. Give you all that. But here's a guy, he's standing in the pulpit Sunday by Sunday by Sunday. His church building is full. His offering plates are full. He's building buildings. He's hiring staff. He's, you know, having all these, quote, ministries, unquote, programs. You know, everything is rosy. Everything is fine. And so then, you know, some people come in and say, you know, Pastor, you know, you need to start speaking on the issues. Well, he doesn't do it. And what changes? Nothing changes. The offerings are still full. The church is still full. The programs are still going on. So where is the motivation for him to say, you know what, maybe I should start really speaking? But I guarantee you, if 10% of his flock would come to him and say, Pastor, we've been sitting in your ministry for X number of months or years. You refuse to address any of the issues that are so pertinent to our future, our freedom, our kids, et cetera. And we're just telling you that if we don't get some positive action from the pulpit of this church for the future of our kids and freedom in this country, we're going to find a pastor that will. That would get his attention. Unfortunately, so many of our pastors are like politicians. They don't see the light. They feel the heat. But right now, the congregations of the churches are not putting any heat on the pulpits to do anything different.
Yeah, and it should be the church is saying, we're not going to put up with this 501c3, you take the legislation, you take the rules. And political correctness is killing us as a nation, and there's so much intimidation, but it really should be, we should be telling them what to do, not the other way around, shouldn't it?
Well, you know, the fact of the matter is that the church is independent. It's completely independent. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the First Amendment.
The separation of church and state, right?
Yeah, that's the whole purpose, is to keep the government out of the affairs of the church. I mean, the church has an independent voice. It has an independent mission. You know, everything about the church is completely separate from the mission of government and the purpose of government. I mean, there's no connection. And so for pastors and church leaders, trustees, deacons, elders, for them to sit back and allow the government to dictate to them. I mean,
it is just frightening.
It's incomprehensible. I mean, when you go back into history and you look at the men of God, the stories of courage and conviction that you read about from these men, and they were bold as lions. Those men would not have accepted. Can you imagine those men in colonial America and early America that would have tolerated for one letter? I mean, one letter, like we talked about earlier, would have been enough for them to go ballistic.
Our forefathers would be shooting Chuck. And of course, we can thank LBJ for ruining everything, can't we?
Yeah, LBJ. Boy, I tell you, the guy was he was a genius in the way that he orchestrated all that. When there was no such thing as a 501c3 nonprofit tax exempt status before that code of the IRS was instituted by LBJ back in 1954. And the reason he did it, of course, was the people of Texas at that time were giving him fits for a lot of the liberal policies that he was trying to get through Washington. He tried, and it was the pulpits. It was coming from the pulpits, and he was trying to, how can I get these churches and pastors to leave me alone? And he whether he came up with it by himself or somebody else, but he's the one that carried the water and came up with that 501c3 monstrosity. And it didn't happen overnight, of course.
No.
But over a period of decades, it produced what we are today.
I guess Paul's ministry would have been a dismal failure when you compare him to the Osteens, Warrens, and the Bill Hybels of the world, hey?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think all the apostles, I mean, whenever you look at the Apostle Paul, when he came to the end of his life and he wrote his own epitaph, basically is what he did in 2 Timothy 4:7. And he said, I fought a good fight, I finished my course, I've kept the faith. That's it. He didn't say a word about it, how many people were in his church, didn't say a word about offerings, not a word about programs, not a word about the size of his buildings, how many staff members he had. I fought a good fight, I've finished my course, I've kept the faith. I mean,
well, these other hucksters are fighting a fight to keep on the bestseller list, and also their super mega dome churches. I mean, it's pretty staggering, the absolute contrast of the early church, who again turned the world upside down, and now you have a very, it's a very loosey-goosey, anything goes, politically correct, lukewarm. I call it, it's a light Christianity today, and I find that very, very disheartening.
11 o'clock on Sunday morning is Christian happy hour.
I mean, it's reality, and a guy can laugh, but it's actually quite sad, isn't it, what we've become?
Well, as we've been talking about this entire hour, it's more than sad. I mean, this is the life of our nation at stake. It's the entire future of our liberty is at stake. We are in a very precarious point in human history. I mean, we have to recognize that if liberty ever does collapse in the United States, there was somebody on national television that I heard make this quote. I can't remember if it was Pat Buchanan or who it was, but it was a great quote. He said, if America really does lose its liberty, it would send the world into 1,000 years of dark ages.
I agree.
And you know what? I think that's true. I really do. I think it would send the entire world into dark ages for many, many hundreds of years. This is the most precarious moment in human history since the shot fired heard around the world. And how the pastors and the Christians of America react over the next very, very short period of time is going to have a lot to do with how this country goes. So there's a lot at stake here. We're not talking about something that's trivia. This is as important as it gets.
Yes.
And for these preachers like Osteen and Hybels and Rick Warren and these guys to treat the ministry as they do and to have the leadership that they have, Churches of America.
Joel Osteen himself just said recently, I don't really preach about the gay issue because I don't understand it. I thought, what is not to understand? The Bible's pretty clear on it here, Joel. I mean, it's amazing how, you're right, we are at a very critical precipice, and I think that liberty is so integral. You know, when you think of the forefathers, I mean, they didn't back down in the face of tyranny. You know, can you imagine them rolling over at a very important time? I think of the Minuteman and just think of how could we absolutely get to this point where it's just the shoulder-shrugging mindlessness, which is a good segue. Chuck, how can people get involved in what I think is so important, this Liberty Church movement?
Well, can I give the website?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, well, if they go to my general website, chuckbaldwinlive.com, it's all one word, my name, Chuck Baldwin Live, that's my radio show, chuckbaldwinlive.com. And then from there, they can see all of the links to everything else, including the books that we referenced a few moments ago, and how they can order To Keep or Not to Keep, Why Christians Should Not Give Up Their Guns, or Romans 13, The True Meaning of Submission. And also on the front page, they'll see the Liberty Church Project link, and they can go to that. You know, the main thing is if we're looking for either ministers or laymen, either or, who have maybe just a handful of people that are willing to start a non-501c3 church. It doesn't take many, a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, just a handful of people that are willing to start. And there's an application form on the website that someone needs to fill out. That will start the process going. Our staff will get in touch with them. We'll start getting into the wheres and how and so forth from that point. And then and I have a team of people helping me. I'm not doing this by myself. And we'll get out there into these locations and start helping people start these non-501c3 churches. Or we have ministers who are facing the same kind of problems from the other side of them. There's a lot of good preachers out there that really wish they had a group of patriot Christians that they could minister to, because they're having trouble from the other side of the pulpit. So, we can match up some of these groups of patriot-oriented, liberty-loving Christians with these pastors that are looking for that kind of a flock, and start getting these people together so that they can start, engaging the culture with this church. And also, maybe it's an existing church where the pastor is trying to teach the people the liberty principles, and he maybe could use some help doing that. Well, we'd be glad to help him as well, even if it's an existing church.
Time to quit being armchair patriots here. I think we're at a critical juncture in history, and it's imperative, people. I mean, I really encourage people to go to Weekend Vigilante. Of course, Chuck's website is linked there. Folks, get his books, support him. I think, again, this is so critical, the Liberty Church movement. Chuck, I want to thank you not only for coming on, but thank you for all the work that you have done, not just as a renowned pastor, but one of the few, I think, that's really, really been instrumental in providing this kind of information. And I think everybody should have a copy of these books. And, of course, get involved. Get this application, folks, and it's just so critical. I really believe it is. Chuck, I want to thank you so much for coming on tonight.
It's great. It's great to be with you again. Thank you so much for letting me come on the show, Sheila.
Thank you, Chuck. Folks, that was Chuck Baldwin. Again, go to weekendvigilante.com, and his website is on the link there. And I really encourage everyone. Folks, with your hosts, Sheila Zielinski and Doug Hagmann, the instigator and the investigator, teaming up for this Saturday edition. Our next guest has spent 14 years working as a journalist in broadcast news. From morning news anchor to primetime anchor reporter, he won 2 Emmy Awards and 2 Edward R. Monroe Awards. You know him from Reality Check. One of our personal favorites, Ben Swan. Welcome to the program. Great to have you back on.
Thanks so much for having me on.
I just want to say, folks, Ben Swan is one of my favorite journalists, and if you go to benswan.com, you can see why, and that's Ben Swan, 2 N's on swan.com. It covers a lot of topics, and very, very well known. And he's my go-to guy for really cutting-edge news. I cannot say enough good about Mr. Swan, so I just wanted to throw that in there. Go ahead.
Yeah, he's definitely one of our favorites. There's so much to get into here, fellas. You know, when politicians in our country try to divide us based on religion, income, sex, race especially, it is so unconscionable. You know, this 2,000-year-old entrenched anger and hatred between this sect and that sect, one of the most magnificent things about this country and its founders is really what the English philosopher John Locke said about America 300 years ago. He deemed it as a blank slate, something different than the rest of the world. We didn't have the baggage of a feudal system or a monarchy, balkanization. The revolution wasn't fought over religion or wealth here. It was fought over liberty. And these people do not embrace our principles. Why would you take bad histories of other systems and try to apply them here? So when you have Eric Holder and these other politicians droning on about, oh, it's a racist society, they want to create political contempt here and racial division, racial politics. I mean, it's income inequality rather than preaching liberty. We don't have the facts on what's going on here in Missouri right now. We know an innocent, unarmed 18-year-old African-American was killed, and we need to get to the bottom of it. But we don't have any facts, really. We don't know. They won't release the name of the officer. But, folks, this isn't some civil rights movement. People are going into that town armed, and there's civil unrest. People are getting killed. The Black Panthers are moving in. What's your take on all this, Ben?
Well, I think you make a good point. It's not an issue of race. That doesn't mean that race didn't play a factor in whatever the police officer was thinking or whatever the situation was here. But I think the problem is when we, especially in media, we demean certain stories by making them about race when we try to pit people against each other. You know, the Ku Klux Klan has now come out saying, well, it's going to raise money for the police officer. Which if I'm that police officer, I want to say, wait a minute, don't start dragging me into what you guys are doing. At the same time, I think there are major issues here, but the biggest one is this. I think the issue that media is not talking about, because race is the easy one, right? It's easy to pit people against each other. It's easy to try to basically create a Trayvon Martin 2.0, which is what it feels like they're doing here. And instead, you have the real conversation about police tactics, militarization of police. Why are tanks rolling into town? Why is tear gas being used to be fired at journalists who are out there? I mean, there are a lot of issues here that are being glossed over, when the real issue, I think, is really one of a police state and police force, and in many cases, unnecessary force that we see happen across the country on a regular basis. It's not about black and white, but that's not the story media is telling us.
That's so true because, we're really seeing a militarization of our police, aren't we, though? That really is an issue. You're right. Jump in there, Doug.
Well, I was just surprised at the two reporters being arrested out of McDonald's when they were at McDonald's. That account really, for whatever reason, caught my attention. Ben, you heard about that, correct? The Washington.
That's correct.
Looking at that from an investigative point of view, I'm just trying to reconcile what in the world is going on in the larger sense here. There seems to be this intentional blackout, this desired blackout by our government to, not just to omit the truth, but omit all reporting all across the board. Isn't that what you're seeing?
Well, I think that's correct. One of the problems is this, that throughout the country, as I mentioned, with this militarization, this buildup that we have, there is almost a view of the need for martial law anytime police deem it necessary or politicians deem it necessary. And so what happens as a result of that, you have restrictions on the freedom of journalists, you have the restrictions on those who are simply covering a story or who are eyewitnesses to a story, or even the layman who has a cell phone in their pocket who wants to record what's happening. We have a crackdown on all those things happening in Ferguson right now, but it's not just Ferguson. Ferguson's a microcosm of what we're seeing across the country. Yeah. I think the difference here is that, go back to what happened in Boston when we had the search for Johar Tsarnaev, and you had police officers going into homes without warrants and martial law had been declared. And at the same time, you had specific people who were required while that was happening to go in and work in I believe it was a Baskin-Robbins or a Dunkin' Donuts nearby in order to provide coffee for the police. And they required employees to show up and go under order of police. So it's a very strange culture that's being developed. And I think the culture is what Americans need to pay attention to, not so much to the individual stories, even though maybe those stories kind of highlight what the culture is becoming. But we've got to get a hold of that culture.
And you're right. It forces more presence, and I think that's the slow gradualism and the subjugation to this police state uprising. Those are things that, you're right. Culture is very indicative of the times, isn't it?
Well, it is, and the culture always is. So, one of the mistakes that I think people make, especially those who are activists who are on the side of liberty, is that we're looking to change the behavior without changing culture. And I think in this country, what we've really got to do is we've got to work on changing the culture, how people view themselves, what people view about freedom, how they view liberty, whether or not they believe they truly have rights, whether or not government grants rights or whether those rights belong to them. I mean, just go back again to this story of the two journalists in the McDonald's. So it's a reporter from the Washington Post and a reporter from the Huffington Post. Yeah. And they're in the McDonald's, and basically what they're doing is they're using the free Wi-Fi. It's probably what they're doing because they're working inside the McDonald's and they're posting stories. Well, the police come in and decide they're going to shut down the McDonald's, and because they weren't packing their bags quick enough, they get thrown against the walls. One of them says they had their head banged against the window. The police were in full riot gear, and you're asking, what are you guys doing? It's one thing to be at a riot in riot gear, but why are you just into a McDonald's in riot gear? No one's rioting in the McDonald's at the time this is happening. At least there's absolutely no reports of that. It's extremely strange. And again, it goes back to the culture. What culture are we allowing to be built and designed in this country? And unless we shift the culture that says, you know what, let's demilitarize police. Let's change tactics. Let's require more of police officers rather than less accountability. The only way that's going to happen is if we change the American culture.
Absolutely agree with that. And here's the thing, speaking of American culture, again, you've got this sect, that sect, different kind of ideologies, different kind of cultures, different religions. And speaking of things spiraling out of control, terrorists now, Ben, have more control, more territory, more weapons, more money than they've ever had, knocking off banks, whatever. They've got millions. We, the people, are unilaterally disarming against the enemy here. I mean, we're becoming totally isolated, abandoning our allies and leaving big chunks of the world open for these subhuman barbarians, is what I call them, to get stronger and stronger. Our military is so badly degraded while the enemy is on the rise, and I think it's time to take a macro view here, step back and look at the fact that we have fewer combat-ready soldiers since before World War I. We're abandoning our borders. No one in government supports securing the borders. Our politicians simply will not build a secure system for the border. If you now support a secure, and of course if you are in favor of deportation, well, then you're a racist. You don't like Latinos. Oh, you must be a Tea Partier. Obama will not act here. Congress won't act, and nobody's acting. So the other day I was listening to incredible words of John Brennan. Chuck Hagel also weighed into this. And listen to this. Think about this for a sec, Doug and Ben. Chuck Hagel's referring to ISIS as one of the most brutal, barbaric forces we've ever seen. He's repeated that. It's a force and a dimension that we've never seen. Well, here it is, Ben. It's like Obama said, let me find the most stupid guy on earth. I'm going to make him Secretary of Defense. Let me find the second stupidest. I'll appoint him Secretary of State. And the third, I'll make him CIA Director. I mean, folks, think about John Brennan calling the caliphate a feckless delusion. It's never going to happen. Play that clip.
Our strategy is also shaped by a deeper understanding of al-Qaeda's goals, strategy, and tactics that we have gained over the last decade. I'm not talking about al-Qaeda's grandiose vision of global domination through a violent Islamic caliphate. That vision is absurd, and we are not going to organize our counterterrorism policies against a feckless delusion that is never going to happen. We are not going to elevate these thugs and their murderous aspirations into something larger than they are.
A feckless delusion, it's never going to happen. Yet the CIA trains and arms Islamic rebels, making matters worse. What's going on here, Ben? And, I mean, could we be looking at suffering another grievous attack because of all this?
Everything you said is true. Well, unfortunately, what a lot of folks don't know is that, we talk about, and everything you said is true. We have terrorist organizations that are better funded than ever before. I think ISIS is a great example of what terror organizations are becoming. If you consider the fact that ISIS, just a few weeks ago, now maybe it's grown since then, but just a few weeks ago, it only had 9,000 fighters in it. Which, if you think about it, is a stunningly small number of people. In order to be able to just roll through a country like they have through Iraq. Now, on a side, it makes a great case for why the Second Amendment is important, right? Because 9,000 people could not roll through Texas, I can tell you that, and run over countless people there because you have an armed populace, and it's a very different situation when there's an armed populace, which they don't have in Iraq. But beyond that, look at where ISIS came from. ISIS was a creation of the United States indirectly, along with Turkey and Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Why? Because they were trying to overthrow Assad, and they armed these groups, and the United States has armed them heavily and funded them. They did so under the guise that these guys were going to overthrow Assad. These were the rebel forces. ISIS turned around, crossed the border, went into Iraq, and said, hey, it's a lot easier than fighting Assad in Syria. It's just to come back over here and fight al-Maliki in Iraq because they have no force. They have no military force. The United States has left, and we shouldn't have been there in the first place, but the United States has left, and it makes it easy pickings. And as a result of that, what's happened is we have this enormous power vacuum. You have, as you said, they're going in and seizing funds from banks. They're seizing oil fields. They have found a way to become incredibly wealthy very quickly. But look at the pictures of these guys. They're driving around in American Humvees. They have weapons that are provided by the United States. And you have people like John McCain, Senator John McCain, who, last year went to Syria and demanded that we arm these rebels. Now John McCain is making the rounds on Sunday morning shows, wringing his hands and saying, ISIS is a threat to the United States. They will attack us here on our own soil. Well, Senator, then why did we arm them? If they are a great threat to us, why did we provide the weapons? And here's the thing. John McCain actually said late last year or early this year, he made a statement about arming rebels in Syria with the shoulder-fired missiles.
Right.
And he said that even though there was a risk that they might get into the hands of al-Qaeda, it was worth the risk to take Assad out. Well, now, you shift the storyline and it's, ISIS is so dangerous. It's the most dangerous force we face. You know what? I'm going to go on record as saying ISIS is not that dangerous of a force. They're not. They're only a danger to us because we fund them, we provide them weapons, and we are the ones who allow them to become the force that they've become. We've done that. And now, of course, we're going back into Iraq. We've got airstrikes that are taking place. I'm sure before long we'll have boots on the ground because we'll decide that it's in the best interest of the United States to do that once again, and once again to secure oil fields in Iraq.
Is that really the thing, though, to be taking such a non-offensive role here? It's just, we'll put a few troops in there. I mean, really, at this point, that seems like not much of a countermeasure, does it, though?
Well, it's not a countermeasure, and it goes back to what you said before. You mentioned John Brennan and the caliphate, right, that he had said this was delusional and there was no way that was ever going to happen. And so many of us, I mean, I've actually studied the caliphate for a long time and had talked about this with just people within my own inner circle, the fact that it was absolutely going to be set up at some point. And by the way, this will not be the next caliphate. This one will become, I think, kind of a rogue group, and they'll fall apart. There will be a legitimate caliphate that will be established, and I think that's going to happen in Turkey, not in Iraq, but that's aside. The point is that when John Brennan says that, but again, we have painted the perfect scenario for that to take place. We have done that through creating disruption in Iraq and destabilizing them and overthrowing their government. We did it in Libya, and we overthrew Gaddafi. We have created the perfect atmosphere by funding rebel groups that are actually jihadist groups. We've given them weapons. We've given them technology. We have given them money. We've given them opportunity. We have removed the powers that kept them from rising in the Middle East. And then we walk away saying, we created democracy when we haven't done anything like that, not even sort of.
That's marvelous, Ben. A very accurate assessment of what's taking place. Now, I've written prolifically about Benghazi, for example, well over 4 dozen articles about Benghazi. To me, what's taking place with ISIS, with the progression of this terrorist group ISIS, are arming them. If you take a look, if you go back, even back to the pre-Arab Spring days, the Arab Spring was well planned, well thought out. It wasn't a spontaneous type of operation. You pointed this out very, very effectively. Again, on your website and through your videos, benswan.com. However, my concern here is we've got a guy in the White House, the renegade in chief, as I call him, referring to his Secret Service code name as a renegade, which is synonymous with lawless. And looking at this, you're right. We've armed these groups. It carries New Year's Day stroll through the Middle East, saying we're not going to get involved. Basically, handed over the keys to the Toyota Tundras and the Humvees to ISIS. This does not happen, at least in my opinion. This does not happen clumsily. This happens by design. And I think that's what you're saying, right? I mean, there's a level of complicity here. In addition, I mean, it's not incompetence necessarily. It's almost, and I don't want to go too far out in the weeds and into tinfoil hat territory, as I call it, but you've got to take a look at this and say, wait a minute. Everything that's being done here, it seems like if it was incompetence, at least we'd win once in a while. You know what I mean? Am I right on this, or am I looking?
You're absolutely right. And I think what we have to do is step back from it. When you said tinfoil hat territory, look, as journalists, where we get into conspiracies is where we attempt to tell folks why it's happening. I can't tell you that. I can't tell you why our government would continually arm forces overseas that for 10 years we have been fighting, supposedly fighting. We have spent, almost $1 trillion on the war on terror. We have lost thousands of U.S. lives. We have killed hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan and Yemen and Mali and Somalia. The war on terror has been one of the most incredible kind of modern phenomenons, in that when else in history have you seen governments who work to overthrow people? They never truly overthrow the governments. They keep them essentially in place. We don't conquer nations or nation states as we used to in the past. But now we cause, the figurehead of that government to be overthrown. We arm the people who come in, and then a few years later we fight those people. I mean, it's the strangest scenario if you look at it from a 30,000-foot view. So as a journalist, what we have to do, obviously, is we don't get into the why is it happening, but we certainly have to get into what is happening. And what is happening makes no sense if you believe what the administration tells you. And it's not just this administration. It's the Bush administration, the Obama administration. It'll be the next administration that comes in as well. What they tell us is that we are working to provide and protect American assets abroad, protect American people abroad. We hear, people calling for the protection of Christians in Iraq right now, who are being just slaughtered in Iraq, just as they were slaughtered in Egypt. And by the way, the media really ignored the slaughtering of Christians in Egypt after the Arab Spring. It did not fit their narrative at all. But they talk about Christians being slaughtered by ISIS because we're trying to create the new enemy, the new boogeyman. And I think ISIS is becoming the new boogeyman. It's the new Al-Qaeda. It's the terror network that any minute now they could be on our shores. And these guys are a real threat, so much more dangerous than Al-Qaeda. And they're not, as I said, especially if we'd stop giving them weapons. And they're a much smaller network, by the way, than Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda had a much, much larger network than ISIS does. But again, it goes back to what's happening. So the why is difficult, and I think you and I both run into that, right? The issue of talking about why is where people say, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist. But if you talk about what is happening,
where is this commander-in-chief when it comes to all hell breaking loose? You know, I mean, he threw a little statement in there about Missouri, a little quick, well, you know, we don't want to be tolerating that. But, I mean, for the most part, the beheading and the butchering has been alluded to. Why is Obama bombing ISIS in Iraq but not in Syria? You know, look at the situation, Mount Sinjar and Erbil, and there's airstrikes there. But, you know, it's not any kind of concerted campaign. I mean, why not look at absolutely containing it? I mean, is that what we're doing, or do we need an offensive here? It just makes me wonder, where is Obama when all hell is breaking loose? Oh, right. He's golfing. He's yucking it up. He's having fun. He's on a vacation. He's on another vacation. I mean, do you just shake your head with this guy some days here, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely, because you have to look at what's happening as well and say, well, part of the reason that the administration seems so calm about all of it is because they're a big part of it. And not a part of it in that I don't think the Obama administration necessarily said, well, we want to see Iraq fall into the hands of ISIS. I'm not even sure that they really understood who ISIS was. But I do think that they have a very straightforward goal. The powers in the Middle East right now, including Turkey, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, want the Assad regime out of Syria. They've been trying for almost 3 years to remove them by funding these groups. And somehow the Assad regime has managed to stay in power, which is a testament to their own ability to be able to stay in power. But Assad has managed to remain, and as I said, there was a certain level of, I think, frustration among even ISIS themselves because they're not making the ground they want to, and said, well, why are we going to do this here? Let's just go into Iraq. We can actually have some gains over there. So we'll continue to fight them. But as you just alluded to, we're not fighting them in Syria. Even right now, while we've got clearance for airstrikes in Iraq right now, we have this kind of mounting campaign to return to Iraq, especially from the kind of chicken hawk neocons. We keep hearing that we need to go back, but we have not changed course in terms of funding rebel forces in Syria. That has not changed. And so we continue that policy. But again, it goes back to media. The fact that our mainstream national media will not connect any of those dots, and it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to connect them. You just say, look, why is it, guys, that we're still funding the rebel forces in Syria who also happen to be the ones we're fighting in Iraq? It makes no sense to the average person, and so the average person doesn't even know that it's happening.
Crickets chirping in the mainstream media about that very thing. Why are we funding that? I mean, let's face it, you don't hear that in the 6 o'clock news, Ben.
That's right.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit here. Let's jump into the economy. Every day it just amazes me because the old unscrupulous charlatans here in the U.S., they never stop. Who was it, Doug, that accused the USA of living off their printing press? I mean, the feds just keep churning out the money, and then there's Janet Yellen, Bernanke 2.0 in a skirt is what I call her. All hell is breaking loose in the economic world. I mean, let's jump into the China thing. I mean, essentially they're trying to destroy the very fabric that holds our economy together, killing the petrodollar, it appears. They own all our ports, our resources. They're building the largest oil refinery in Saudi Arabia, inking oil deals off there with Saudis and the yuan. They appear to be easing us out as the world fiat currency system. And meanwhile, back at home, like I said, nothing to see here, folks. We're all in recovery. I mean, think about this. This is absolutely unbelievable. They tell us we're in recovery, nothing to see here, yet look at what's going on. Russia's biggest state-controlled mega oil producers considering using euros as a settlement currency instead of the dollar. They've already given us a finger saying, yeah, we're not going to play with dollars anymore. Now there's the BRICS running out the IMF, the Russians able to probably do this. I mean, if China, India, Russia, Brazil, and others go along with this playbook, I mean, then you'll remove a lot of the international payment system from dependency on the dollar, producing a run on the dollar. Do you think this is the death of the dollar? Has that officially begun, Ben?
I do think it's already begun. I think that the U.S. dollar absolutely has jumped the shark, for lack of a better term. But even more recently, I think we're in a position now where, and this goes back to how media has covered the story. When I first started learning about the petrodollar back in 2011, 2012, I was stunned as a journalist that I knew nothing about it to begin with, and the fact that it's just not covered. And yet, forget ISIS, forget Ferguson, forget Robin Williams. The most important story, the biggest story that should be on every network newscast, it should be on every local newscast in this country, is a discussion of what is about to happen to the dollar. And they do not talk about this issue. It is incredible if you think about what is about to take place, because the reality is we have a really no generation of American alive right now who does not remember a time when the U.S. dollar was not the world's reserve currency. So it is almost unfathomable to people. I think the average person, if you said to them, what does it mean to be the world's reserve currency, could not tell you.
Yeah, and at the end of World War II, you're right. We don't have really a generation. That's a really excellent point, because when you look at the end of World War II, when it came in, really becoming the most important currency in the world because of our strong military juggernaut, and gold until 71, of course, when Nixon kiboshed that. But anyway, that's such a good point that you're raising.
Excellent point, yep.
Right, because so when you suddenly realize that at this point that there is no one really alive right now who remembers that. So as I said, if you go to most people, you say, what does it mean to be the world's reserve currency? They can't tell you what that means. They have no idea what it means. They just know that the U.S. dollar is the most important currency in the world, and you can use it basically anywhere. You can take dollars anywhere in the world and use them, and they have a certain amount of value because of that. They don't know where the value comes from. They don't know where it's derived from, and they don't know how it would lose value. And so we almost have this very strange syndrome where we cannot view the world without that being our paradigm. And the paradigm is about to shift. You have China, as you pointed out, is actively. They're not just passively allowing this to happen. They are actively working to unhinge the U.S. dollar from petroleum. They're doing it. Does our government know they're doing it? Yes. Do the Saudis know they're doing it? Yes. What people don't understand is that, after 1 year, I believe it was, 1 year after we came off the gold standard, the U.S. set up this agreement to peg all oil sold around the world to dollars. And it's an agreement that we have with the Saudis. We particularly selected the Saudis. So when people sit around and say, well, why do we have this relationship with the Saudis? It all comes back to our dollar. It's not even so much oil per se as it is the dollar being connected to oil. And so because of that, we find ourselves in a position now where China is working out these agreements with Russia, with Venezuela. They have a junk for oil deal with Iran. In fact, at this point, it's pretty incredible. The BRICS countries, Brazil, China, Russia, India, South Africa, are all working actively and proactively to devalue and to take away the strength of the dollar as the U.S. reserve currency, and it won't be there in the future. Now, whether or not it's replaced by something else remains to be seen. There may not be a world reserve currency. I'm not even sure we need a world reserve currency, but it won't be the U.S. dollar. And when that happens, Americans are going to be stunned to no longer be in that position, and it's something that we can't even fathom right now.
What's Ben, in your estimation, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, nor do I, what is a post-U.S. dollar world reserve currency world going to look like?
Well, I think it's going to look like, again, no crystal ball, but I think it'll look much more like the rest of the world in that Americans become much more insecure in their ability to purchase. Their purchasing power goes down. Their savings power goes down. And beyond that, look, Americans live an insane lifestyle, right? The lifestyle that we live essentially says it doesn't matter what I actually have or how much money I have. It doesn't matter what assets I actually own. I want stuff. So I'm going to borrow as much as I possibly can in order to, acquire the stuff that I want right now. And that's the way we view the world. We do that in business. We do that in the way that we buy TVs and the way we buy cars. I think that will change significantly. I think that what Americans will find is their ability to have credit is going to disappear very quickly. I think obviously as a nation, our ability to go out and to rack up debt goes away. Unfortunately, I think in the short term, that's where the real pain is, because all of a sudden, I think the value of U.S. bonds and Treasury bonds is going to drop significantly. The U.S. is not going to be able to continue to survive by simply borrowing $1 trillion every year, which is a third of their budget. And what's going to actually happen is that the U.S. is going to suddenly have to start making very strange decisions. I think we'll see some kind of a seizure of 401k plans and retirement plans in order to help pay off national debt. I think that will happen at some point. It's going to be very ugly in the short term. Long term, I think the United States is just going to be in a very different place than it has been historically.
I think the IMF's days are numbered, too, because look at this BRICS deal. I mean, a lot of the other loans were forced austerity measures, but now, I mean, when people hear BRICS, they think, it's just Brazil, Russia, India, China, South, but I mean, they've got to remember 105 countries are involved in this. That's very interesting, isn't it, Ben?
Well, it absolutely is. And again, this goes back to the idea that what we're facing right now is a very interesting time because BRICS countries, so in the United States, we're demonizing Russia every chance we get, and yet the Russians are incredibly influential right now. Becoming more and more powerful, more and more of a world player in their part of the world, as they had been long ago, and they're kind of returning to that position.
It kind of seems like Putin wants a resurgence of the former Soviet Union, maybe just wishing they had the technology that they do now. Would not have been a perfect scenario.
Well, and I think it's interesting because I think we're actually that our country is more like the old Soviet Union. And what Putin is trying to create is a kind of a hybrid Soviet Union that's, clearly bringing all these other countries into it. But I don't think Putin necessarily wants as oppressive of a regime as what the old Soviet Union was. I think what he wants to see is, strong military power, control over large groups of people, but more of a Western world in terms of capitalism and free markets. And believe it or not, I've been told, and I haven't been there, but I've been told if you go to Moscow that there's much more of a free market there than there is here in the United States.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Russia, too, because Western media and I mean, this is something I think you've talked about before, their continual position, Russia did it, when it comes to the Malaysian airliner, the MH17. I mean, the world is waiting for answers from Russia. You've alluded to this, and I think it's fair to say that there's never been any credible evidence, yet, all the talking heads are churning out the same echo chamber rhetoric. There's no question Russia's involved. I mean, it's not just the issue with the media, but would you agree, Ben, that the consumer of media is as much as fault as what the media churns out?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's no question about it. The consumer of the media is the biggest problem. It's actually not – the biggest problem is not the media, it's the consumer. Because the consumer of media, quite simply, is in a position where they do not go to journalists in order to be educated.
Right.
They just simply don't. Instead, they go to news media to validate the position they already hold. And so educating people is extremely difficult because they don't come to you to be educated. It's almost viewed as insulting to try to educate someone on any number of issues. And instead they act like, well, because what we've done is we've trained people to learn a few talking points as facts, as if they're facts, and they regurgitate them to you as if they're facts, whether they're true or not true. But they already hold those certain, kind of sacred cow positions, and they refuse to hear anything else, refuse to even consider anything else. And so if you're a journalist and you attempt to talk about something that's outside of the paradigm that people have already placed you into, they want no part of it.
You know that well, don't you, Doug, writing so many articles for the Canada Free Press. Don't dare try to educate someone.
And that's why, and I at the risk of sounding like I'm providing too many platitudes here, that's why Ben Swann has been so popular in terms of his reporting. I mean, there is this resistance being informed of informing people or people wanting to be informed. They're wanting validation of their own thoughts, not information of reality. And, so that's, I mean, right on the money. That's all I got to say.
Well, and it's no wonder he's got a huge following. His work has become an internet phenomenon with over 10 million video views in over 140 countries. It's no wonder because you're spot on, Ben. And I think truth in journalism is really important, and yet I always say, with the lamestream media, and I call it that for a reason, because it's really disturbing to me They tell you what they want you to hear. They tell you what they want you to know. And, you know, anybody that says it's not contrived, I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen that Conan O'Brien doing a little spoof, every single mainstream churning out exactly a verbatim statement, and he kind of does this little spoof on it, but I don't find that funny. It's very scripted, saying the exact same phrase, but it's an interesting phrase. Play that clip.
A lot of people think the big news stories today are the snowstorm that's hitting the Midwest or the looming federal budget cuts. But judging by local news, there's apparently an even bigger story that's sweeping the nation right now. Check it out.
Well, if you filled up your gas tank lately, then you don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are on the rise. I know.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah.
I really think,
what a coincidence!
Yeah.
It becomes pretty evident right away as you're watching this clip that it's contrived.
Well, it is. I can actually explain to you where that comes from. A lot of people, I've seen those clips before, by the way, and they are embarrassing. And actually, a friend of mine was in one of those clips, and
oh no,
pretty mortified to have been in there. So here's how it works. So in any newsroom across the country, you have, first of all, an incredible shortage of actual reporters and journalists, and you have, these ever-shrinking newsroom staff. At the same time, you have producers who were brought in. A lot of these producers are just kids, right? They're straight out of college in their 20s. Some of them are older, though, in their 30s and 40s and even 50s. But they have this massive amount of news they have to put on every day. And so every single station in the country has what's called a wire service. And it can range from the AP wires to Reuters to CNN, Fox wires, CBS wires, depending on their affiliation. And so what they'll do is they'll get certain stories that will come in, and they'll come across their newsroom computer, their newsroom service that's on their computer, and it will flash certain stories. And so, for instance, if you are a CNN affiliate, and most stations are a CNN affiliate, at least there's one in every market for sure, they'll get these CNN stories that will come down. And some producer will see the story come down, and they will copy and paste the information, because the story's already written. They'll copy and paste it, and they'll drop it into a script for a newscast. And so that morning or that afternoon or that evening, depending on when the newscast is, you do every single day. You have literally journalists across the country, or news anchors, I should call them, who are sitting in front of their teleprompters, who are reading the exact same script word for word. That happens every single day. It's not on occasions when Conan finds it. It's only when Conan puts it up, but it happens every single day. It's the way that it works. The problem with that system, the only problem I have with it, because, look, you do have in these newsrooms a lot of content that has to be created, and I don't think there's anything wrong with everyone reading the same script, because it's not really a nefarious plan. The problem that I've seen in newsrooms isn't so much that everyone's reading the same script, it's that no one ever questions that script. There's never been a single time when I was in a newsroom where someone has said, as the AP script comes down, has said, the AP script may be wrong, or, do we know that to be true? Well, the assumption is that it's true because it's on the AP wires. If it's on the AP wires, it has to be true. And so that's the problem that I have seen with this system, is that it creates this assumption that there are almost, the news gods are sending you information, and so it's correct, and you don't challenge it and you don't question it.
That's a key phrase you just used, because you have questioned things. You were the one that came out and questioned Obama on this kill list, the constitutionality of it. And I think that is incredible that a journalist, and by the way, kudos for having the balls to be able to do that, because a lot of new journalists would not touch that with a 10-foot pole. In fact, no journalist was doing it prior to you, and I just want to really commend you because Obama right now, Ben, is so brazen, he's so arrogant, I think more than any other time. And I will say this, these are not Ben Swann's words, these are Sheila Zielinski's words. He is the most duplicit and treasonous puppet in my mind ever. And that, I'm on record as saying that. I mean, and speaking of the headlines, Ben, I mean, I used to think, well, every week there was a crazy story, but now it's getting to the point where every day there's these headlines you can't make up. Week after week and day after day, they're just, you cannot make this stuff up. I mean, banning cupcakes now. I mean, we know we're banning guns, but banning bake sales. I mean, some of the stuff do you ever just step back and go, wow, this is nuts. I can't even believe. Do you ever think, I cannot believe what I am reading here?
Well, there are days when I think that, and then I have to realize, too, that the only reason that even little bits of it are getting out, I think a lot of it has to do with the Internet, but mostly because so much of the population just doesn't hear it. And so I feel like there's less concern about being revealed by those who are in power because they just feel like most people don't know what to do about it. I talk to people all the time who say, well, that sounds terrible, but, I mean, what can we really do? And so they're almost like depressed even at hearing it. And I've had people who tell me, you know what, I don't like you to tell me this stuff because I don't want to hear about it because I can't do anything about it anyway. So I'd rather just believe it's not happening. Well,
so bury your head in the sand, right? That's a good.
There are people who feel that way.
But then that's been kind of a programming device for decades now. It's kind of a fait accompli. The old "you can't fight City Hall" routine. So don't tell me about it. What can I possibly
Start with the Weekend Vigilante and the Hagmans for August 16th, 2014. I'm your host, Sheila Zielinski. If you're just joining us, folks, we have a hard-hitting guest this hour. He really needs no introduction, but for those new listeners, I nicknamed him the Chuck Norris of trends forecasting. He's the founder of Trends Research Institute and author of a book I've read that was excellent, Trends 2000. He's highly respected and regarded for his uncanny track record of economic, business, consumer, and geopolitical trends before they come to pass. He's one of our favorites because he doesn't mince words. Gerald Celente, welcome to the program, sir. Good to have you on.
Well, thanks for having me, Sheila.
Oh, so much to get into here, Gerald. It's just crazy town. I mean, the technocratic oligarchs want to control our future here. They want us dumbed down with this celebrity culture, watching Dancing with the Stars, mindlessly watching football, playing Xbox, staring at our smartphones. There's no political awareness here, just racial divisions all over, everything done in the name of political correctness. And you've got MSNBC and Clown News Network consciously churning out the propaganda, telling everybody what they want us to know. And then Fox News, of course, will play the other angle of the propaganda, but none of them telling the truth or using any ethical journalism. I mean, it's sickening, Gerald. What's your take on all this?
Well, that's why I call them the prostitutes. The propaganda comes out from the government, and the prostitutes repeat it. And it's just a breakup of the two parties. And as I call the two parties, being a political atheist, they're no different to me than the Bloods and the Crips. They're murderers and thieves. And I don't say that sarcastically. They've killed millions of people in immoral and illegal wars, and they steal our money and give it to their friends under the names of too big to fail and whatever else you can make up. So all they're doing is the bidding for the administration and the political parties. And it's very obvious when they all follow the same lines. For example, we heard that Obama was going to save those Christians on the mountain. And, we heard of a tribe that we never heard before, but, boy, everybody started repeating the propaganda, in Iraq. And it had nothing to do with saving Christians on the mountain. As the reports that I'm reading now, these people were living up there. And, there's chaos all over the place because of the war begun on lives by Bush and Cheney and the total destabilization of that country when over 1 million people have been killed and millions of refugees. So, there's people wandering all over the place. Matter of fact, yesterday about 400 people were killed. So, but people buy the line. The line is put out by the president. Now the Pentagon is saying, well, we're not going in with those extra forces, or advisors, excuse me. I have to use the right propaganda language, advisors. How about soldiers? But anyway, so they're not going in because they're not there. the 40,000 aren't there. And then another example of the big lie that people buy because it's fed to them, spoon-fed by the propaganda networks. Hey, you know those that Malaysian airline that was shot down over Ukraine? You know who did it, don't you? It was those pro-Russian terrorists. Yeah, they knew it immediately. It became the news immediately. Not one shred of evidence, not one shred of evidence was provided. And a
question I always had was, I asked who had the most to benefit through shooting down that plane. I don't think it was Putin's MO, was it?
No, of course not. And it wasn't certainly the so-called pro-Russian terrorists. Oh, by the way, any side that America is against, they're terrorists. So they're pro-Russian terrorists. You always have to get the language. The people that are being, killed in Gaza, those are Palestinian militants. They're never civilians. They're never good guys. They're always terrorists or militants. So anyway, going back to the Ukraine, when I first heard this happening, I said, another Malaysian airline, falling out of the sky. CNN, that was the major story for 7 weeks in a row, the missing Malaysian airline. So the first time I heard it, that's what I thought. Wow, what's going on? Never heard of Malaysian Airlines before. Now 2 planes in no time. But then the other part of the story is, I remember when that Flight 800, fell out of the sky over Kennedy Airport back in the 90s.
And people before said the 007.
Right. Remember, people said, they saw missiles coming at it.
Yeah.
Well, don't rush to any conclusions here. Don't rush to judgment. We're going to have a complete investigation, I tell you. But within minutes, they told us who shot down the Russian airliner. So what I'm saying is they keep feeding out the propaganda. In the current edition of the Trends Journal, I broke down George Bush's speech on 9/11 and 9 days later when he addressed the nation. And I began the piece by writing, only a madman would speak these words, and only people dumbstruck with fear would believe them. It was like right out of a comic book when you break the words out. Not one shred of proof that why we were going into Afghanistan. A person by the name of Osama bin Laden actually used that phrase. And then again, they put the hatred in there. They kept throwing in that Islam, and radical Muslims. So now it's easy to hate another religion. So the propaganda's been going on forever, and now it's at Joseph Goebbels' level. It's been going on like that for a long time. I remember after 9/11, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists, mouthed that other little slimer up there who was Bush's press secretary, Ari Fleischer.
Yeah. Well, of course, Obama loves to say the former administration. But where is our commander-in-chief? He's golfing. That's right. So while all hell is breaking loose, why is Obama bombing ISIS in Iraq but not in Syria? I mean, that northern Iraq, Mount Sinjar, and it's not any kind of concerted campaign here. Why are we just containing it? I mean, where's an offensive here? Of course, I'm going to let you break down the trends. You've predicted the next phase of the trends. Other big news, Gerald. Your recent trends article, speaking of our commander-in-chief, there's an article, and the caption is, "Don't blame Obamacare, blame I don't care." Look at what our society has become. I mean, new ways to, celebrate mediocrity. It's a whole new level of insanity here. How can the bar be set this low, do you think, Gerald?
It's and that's what we did with this article. We showed the people at virtually every level. We have an office over here. It was an old supermarket, and they had these big windows. And I watch whales, hippopotamuses, and elephants go strolling by every day. All races, all ages, and both genders. The obesity levels are like nothing we've ever seen. And a new thing that I've picked up, that I've noticed, is that how cows are always grazing? Well, so too are the people, because they're walking, and if they're not on their so-called smartphone, they're eating or drinking something. And you look at how people dress. you know, again, I'm old enough to remember when you went on an airplane and it wasn't a flying circus. You know, people came with a little bit of dignity and respect. You went out to a fine restaurant, it was a fine situation. You didn't hear a conversation from 3 tables away. We put pictures in there of Sarah Vaughan singing next to Miley Cyrus, whoever she is, grabbing a crotch, sticking out a tongue, and looking like a fool. And you keep going back and forth. On every level, the bar has been lowered. So we do have the most expensive healthcare system in the world. It's not going to make any difference. Matter of fact, obesity is now being linked to 6 forms of cancer. Type 2 diabetes never existed when I was a young guy. Kids didn't have it. And you keep looking, you mentioned the media. It's one stupid act after another. And by the way, that's all politics is. It's show business for ugly people. And you want to look at them? You got McCain, you have Lindsey Graham, you have Pelosi, Feinstein, or as I like to say, not so Feinstein, and one after another. Obama, it's a joke. Look, could you imagine Eisenhower sitting around with Jay Leno or Letterman or the women on The View? Where's the respect and dignity? And I remember when it started breaking down at that level, when Bill Clinton appeared on Arsenio Hall with sunglasses and playing a bad saxophone.
Oh, isn't he cool? Yeah. This is our president.
And now look at the one we got now, the commander-in-chief.
Oh, he was on Jimmy Fallon yucking it up, too. I like your comparison of sharp-dressed, Cary Grant and classy men of yesteryear compared to, like you just said, new bars of cultural degradation. Guys with their jeans hanging around their knees. And, it's trendy, Gerald.
Well, it's the continuing decline of society at virtually every level. The facts are there for anyone to look at. Go into a supermarket, look at the line of so-called soft drinks, crap that people devour, and you see it. You see the foods that they buy, processed. Oh, by the way, I have a line. Conservatives believe and liberals lie. There are these, whacked out people that believe things like, if we don't get them Muslims over there, they're going to come over here. They actually believe that stuff.
Yeah.
The liberals lie. You point out all of the atrocities being committed by the ones that they love, and they refuse to admit them, and they have the intellectual capacity to do so. I was mentioning about food. Hey, you like those GMOs? You must love them. A person of, the kind of show that you have, Sheila, I'm sure you're really fond of them.
Oh,
thank
yes.
you. Yeah, thank you, Bill Clinton. That's right. Slick Willie Clinton, shove those down. Oh, you like those bovine growth hormones, don't? Oh, yeah. Hey, all those advertisements on TV, the drugs, never allowed before. That's right. Slick Willie slimed those in, too. Oh, you remember the Glass-Steagall Act? Nah, people forgot that one. That was the act put in place following the crash of 1929, put in place at the height of the Great Depression so the banks wouldn't be able to screw us. Oh, yeah. Slick Willie got rid of that one along with Robert the Slime, what's his name? Rubin, yeah. The guy that used to work for the Goldman Sachs gang,
right.
CEO. One atrocity after another committed by the Democrats, and all they want to say are stupid things like, well, he's better than Bush, he's better than McCain. No, they're not. They're murderers. Can't you call a murderer a murderer? How about those lovely drone strikes? Well, they got suspected militants. Suspected of what? And suspected by whom? Oh, the military-industrial complex. Now, there's a reliable source.
Well, never mind the drone strikes or the GMOs because, hey, Ebola's going to wipe us out like the movie Outbreak. Our borders are wide open, of course, to stop terrorism. The lies just keep churning out. It's interesting. You wrote about it in your book, speaking of Trends 2000. Expand on that along with this artificial
Well, you remember that, don't you? Yeah, that was years ago.
I wrote that. A long time ago.
Yeah, I wrote about I wish I could find that. I got the book over here. I wrote about the problems we were going to have with immigration, and that it was a big issue back then. And when you looked at it, you could see by reports, and of course at that time there wasn't, again, the spin put on things, regardless of who it came from. They showed that the more people that came in, the lower the wages went in the country. Here it is, migration threat to global stability. And wait till you see who this is from. And this is from 12/27/1994. Migration is a greater threat to global stability than has been recognized. The sheer press of numbers of very poor, made aware by radio and television of living conditions a boat ride away, is likely to become a steadily more destructive political force for Western democracies. That was said by Jessica Matthews, senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations.
Wow. Well, speaking of the economy, and look at the numbers coming out of China recently, Gerald. We're talking about 9 and 10-year lows, indexes down, Europe's in trouble with, quantitative easing, is that the new term? Hey, let's give some heart paddles to keep Mr. Ponzi alive. Even though he's got one foot in the banana peel and one foot in the grave, Wall Street letting just anybody borrow money, artificially created bubbles ready to burst. The big corporations are not recovering. There's further dollar devaluation. And Janet Yellen, hey, nothing to see here. What is going on here, Gerald?
Well, again, it's just what you said. You know, they kept this whole thing alive with quantitative easing. They called it something different in every country. You look what's going on in Europe, and what are they? They have negative interest rates, and it still can't make the thing happen. You've seen the Bank of Korea just yesterday, South Korea. They lowered rates for the first time in 15 months. You saw the numbers coming out of Europe. You know, the headline is Europe zone growth stagnates and Germany contracts. Okay, let's get this straight. If Germany contracts, France is teetering on recession, and Italy's back in one, there's not going to be any recovery, is there? Oh, and by the way, you can't blame the bad weather on that one, can you? And by the way, they didn't have a bad weather year in winter in Europe this year. It was very mild, actually. So you can't blame it on the weather. And then you look at Walmart's. Their numbers came out, and they're disappointing. You keep going up and down the line. You mentioned China. You have housing, you know, which accounts for what, 20% of their GDP, and after all of that stimulus, sales fell by more than 10%. You pick up the papers, you read what's going on over there in the UK. Oh, hey, houses in London, and that was really a hot market. Poof, they're cooling off really quickly. And you just keep going around the world, and it's the same thing. There's one country after another, and then you put on top of this the problems in Ukraine, what's going on around the world, what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in Venezuela, what's going on in Argentina. The world is at war. Yeah. And when all else fails, they take you to war, and the economy is failing.
You know, Obama is literally doing whatever he wants. I mean, bypassing Congress, more brazen and arrogant than ever. And something happened this week that I find particularly disturbing to the security of this country and the allies. It's a reversal of 40 years of foreign policy. You know, Egyptian president's gone to Russia, and they're going to build military and foreign policy ties. This is a reversal of 40 years of foreign policy. What Obama has done here is destroyed our foreign policy infrastructure through both his passivity and ideology, destroying certain relationships that have taken us decades to build. This is just a complete disaster, and I guess you can't blame the Egyptians.
No, and you can't blame Obama either. I mean, this is a policy of Washington. You know, it's the military-industrial complex policy. And what they're doing is, you look what's going on in Ukraine. You have the Obama administration was the one that said they came out with the credible no evidence that they shot down the plane. And then what do you hear from the Republicans? More sanctions. Sanctions are an act of war. Who are the Then you see full-page ads, the United States Chamber of Commerce saying not to put the sanctions on because they're going to hurt business. So it's not Obama, it's the system. As I said, they're the Bloods and the Crips. You could call the Republicans and Democrats both. And so it's just a policy being continued and carried out in just a different style. I mean, let's not forget that George Bush was booed off the stage on Obama's inauguration day.
Yes, he was.
And that's a first.
Yeah.
So they're both of them. They're the incompetents, the inepts, the liars, the thieves, and the immorality is running through America. The fish rots at the head down. Again, look at the terrorism that we have now in this country. It's the militarization of the police. Look what's going on. And there you got the Obama administration, the one that's supplying them with all of the weapons, or the big weapons that the cops now have that are, thrown away vehicles and armaments from the Iraq and Afghan war.
Yeah.
So it's both of them.
Well, I was surprised today to RT showing the Muslims trying to force Sharia law in the UK. You've got this ISIS thing heating up. I mean, what is your take on this ISIS situation, Gerald?
It's a criminal operation. And what they do is they try to push it into a religion. And we have people that in Tunisia, people that go to Egypt. These are criminal gangs. They're murderers. And they hide behind a religion or a policy. It's no different than any other madmen. It has nothing to do with Islam or Muhammad. It has to do with sick people setting their agenda.
Yeah, it's evil incarnate, beheading and butchering Christians and other people.
So what they do to make the people hate another people is they put a name on it. It's like World War II. What, did people forget that they locked up the Japanese in America?
Right.
They took them out of their homes, lost everything, threw them in camps. So the Japanese became identified with the war that Japan and the United States were fighting. Everybody hated the Germans in World War II. And by the way, you're going to see the same thing happen with Israel. You're going to start seeing more and more anti-Semitism because of the acts being committed by that government. So people associate the entire population with the murderers in chief, regardless of the country. They're Germans, they're Jews, they're Egyptians, they're Muslims, and by the way, they're Americans, because that's the way a lot of people look at us. They can't stand us because of the people leading us.
Well, I know you've got to go, Gerald. Listen, in the final waning moments here, has America got a chance here? We're getting pummeled on every side, and it is fast and furious.
Yes. Because the vacuum is so large. It could be filled with anything. It doesn't have to be filled with hate. It doesn't have to be filled with immorality and murder. It's up to the people. Here I am in Colonial Kingston, New York. I am looking across at the courthouse. John Jay was a jury here. 4 Supreme Court justices came out of here. The Constitution of the United States was drafted, copied off the New York State Constitution. The 1777 Senate House is here. Who started the revolution? It was a handful of people. That's all it takes. And we can have an intellectual, a moral, and a spiritual revolution. I'm not in favor of violence. It's not going to work. It'll only make things worse. And when I say spiritual, I don't mean this New Age stuff. I mean about dignity, courage, and self-respect, and passion. So, yes, it's up to the people. And when you look at the polls, Sheila, one after another, people have no faith. Americans have no faith in the administration or Congress. Now is the time. And it's people like you and others that are putting the voice and the different message out there. And one of the things that we're going to be doing in the upcoming months is we're launching OccupyPeace.us. And it's based on Rebuild America, No Foreign Entanglements. Bring home all the troops, close down all the bases. Again, I'm in Colonial Kingston. George Washington, a real commander-in-chief, not one of these little boys with big mouths and no cojones. This is a guy that led the troops and fought. As his farewell address to the American people, no foreign entanglements. Benjamin Franklin, Jefferson, Adams, one after another, Madison. And then people say, well, the world is different. No, it's not. They had the wars going on back then, too. And by the way, England and France were really going at it, and France ended up copying our revolution in a fight for freedom. So, yes, the opportunity here today is better than it's ever been.
Well, you're right, and I agree with that. Gerald, give out your website for our listeners and how they can not only subscribe but get more information on this project of yours.
Well, the website is trendsjournal.com, and it's a quarterly, as you know, 50 pages, no advertising. But we're also coming out in next week with a Trends Monthly. So we're going to have a monthly between the quarterly, and it's going to be an online edition. With the Trends Journal is both in print and online, and the print is beautiful. It's it's a magazine. It's something to keep, and it's the only place where you're going to read history before it happens. And each weekday night, I do trends in the news, the real news that's going on, and so we keep people ahead of the news and on top of the trends, and we try to make it available to everyone. There's a discount request page for the people that can't afford the full price.
Folks, sign up for this. It's cutting-edge trends, lots of incredible news, incredible access. It's well worth the small fee for what you get. Gerald, thank you so much for coming back on, and we look forward to having you back on soon.
And thank you for having me, and thank you for all you're doing.
Thanks, Gerald. Take care.
Right.
Gerald Celente, what a treat. All our guests' websites are linked over at weekendvigilante.com. Folks, go to weekendvigilante.com, like us on Twitter, Facebook.
Wow. All I can say is, wow, what a powerful program so far. Sheila, I want to thank you so very much for your... Well, Joe, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good. All right. Sheila, we lost the connection with Sheila. Of course, she did all the heavy lifting, so now we can just slide into it, I guess. It was great.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Yeah, Chuck, folks, in case you're tuning in late, Chuck Baldwin, followed by Ben Swan. Ben what a great guy. Well, both of them, and of course Gerald Celente. Really, I wanted to stay out of the firing range of Gerald Celente. I think that's best when to do when he's on. Just let him go. He was really primed up tonight as usual. Anyway,
yeah, and
go ahead.
I didn't catch the beginning of the show, but it was Sheila did a fantastic job, and great all around guest. And I got to go back and listen to the first interview for. I was late.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's all right. I was actually sipping the lattes myself, and I kind of spent some time in the chat room. Interestingly enough, I'm going to give a shout out to Liz in Kentucky. Liz, thanks for what you're doing. Of course, our program is being broadcast, actually, if you can believe this, in a block party type format for those sitting on the couch in your neighborhood. You know where you are in Kentucky. I just want to say hello from the Hagmans and Sheila as well. And, of course, all of our guests want to say hello. Thanks for listening. Interesting setup they've got where they actually broadcast our program via PA system to their subdivision, and it's not forced down their throats. It's by mutual consent. So it's cool. I got an email about that today. So anyway, a lot of news. Joe, anything you want to follow up on with what Gerald said or Ben said or anything like that, or I don't know. I don't know if there's any really need to get into that.
Yeah, no,
do you think?
it was fantastic, and aside, Sheila did a great job, and there's what Gerald said, especially at the very end. All it takes to make a difference are a small group of people that are willing to do things without, in a spiritual way, without worrying about what the rest of the world's going to think or what other people are going to worry or think about. Principled people, motivated by the right reasons, can make a difference, and I just wanted to re-echo that.
Yeah, exactly. And on our website, HomelandSecurityUS.com, the article website or the website where the articles are, I posted a video today. It's been out for a while, and it's got nearly 2 million views, so you could tell it's been out for a while. But it's cleantv.com's 7-minute video. It's called Obama, False Hope, a False Messiah. It's a pretty powerful video, folks, and they urge you to share it, forward it, and such. Take a look at it after the program. It's on HomelandSecurityUS.com. Interesting, very powerful video as well. I've also got some information just for people who are following the events in Ferguson. I'm going to touch on this, and then we can move. I do want to touch on ISIS and tell you about ISIS, Joe. But I had back-to-back meetings today, multiple meetings today. And I want to say thanks, Chris, in particular. Thank you very much for your time. But the second meeting I had, the information I've got about Ferguson is that the feds are actually planting agents on both sides. If you can, well, obviously planting agents within the police department, Joe. I don't know if you've seen any news about that, but they're also planting agents in the crowd, the riotous crowd, to cause the trouble. And they're telling the agents and the police are telling the police to stand back, to stand down, and let the rioters who are being ginned up by the DHS personnel to go riot. Did you see? Is there anything that you've seen that would publicly corroborate that?
Well, what I've seen so far is that, I mean, there's been a lot of development since we last talked about it with that, or the Department of Justice I saw said releasing the tape of this, what is his name, Michael Brown, about releasing the tape of his being involved in an alleged robbery was inflammatory, and that they shouldn't release it. This was what the Department of Justice was urging the local police to do, is not release that information, even though, from what I understand, what the officer did he did not approach Michael Brown knowing that he was a suspect in the robbery, which doesn't make it, it really doesn't make a difference then, that, I mean, I could see if he was approaching him for the case of the robbery, but that wasn't the case. So it really, in my mind, for the Department of Justice to want to keep the truth hidden from the public, like they're not smart enough to take a piece of information and understand that, yes, it does add to the overall big picture, but looking at what happened in the situation, it does not change the situation and what happened with the officer and Mr. Brown and why they got into a confrontation and how it went from there. It's that part about him being suspected of, taking a box of cigars and being violent or aggressive with the store owner has nothing to do with why the cops stopped him. So it really shouldn't make a difference either way. I have seen that they were saying protesters, or there's an update that on stlouistoday.com. They're keeping an updated article going about what's happening in Ferguson. And if you want to check that out, I think the main link is off Dredge.
Okay, all right. Well, the information, and I've been asked to withhold any type of written information, but I guess I'm splitting hairs here in terms of.
And we talked about the Department of Justice pending protests. What were they?
Yeah.
Two different teams of protest coaches, or.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yes. However, Joe, it's even more sinister than that. What they're trying to do is they're trying to take the riots out, extend them beyond Ferguson and into other cities as well. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous, in its face, but
well, no, it was happening in New York City and Los Angeles. Throughout the week, there were smaller protests, and I mean, a lot of these are more like vigils or very peaceful get-togethers that seem to get out of hand with the actions of a few, which would go to what you're saying.
Correspond, yeah.
Because you have groups of people. I mean, I saw a lot of footage of what happened there over the week with that Al Jazeera news crew getting rubber bulleted and tear gassed.
and their equipment taken down, to people sitting in the street with their hands up, as the police moved up on them. And I mean, there's just a lot of things that don't make sense. Police taking action when they shouldn't, and not taking action when they should. There's just a lot of things that are wrong with this situation.
Absolutely. Now, I want to move into ISIS, and then we can go wherever you want to go, Joe. I just want to move into this real quick. On the website, personalliberty.com, Personal Liberty Digest, actually, an article was written on August 13th, that was 3 days ago, by John Myers. Is Barack Obama aiding and abetting ISIS? That's the question. The article starts out with, the Muslim call to prayer is one of the prettiest sounds on earth at sunset. Of course, that was said by Barack Obama. And just very quickly, to borrow upon the famous quote from one of the world's greatest leaders, Winston Churchill, during the Battle of Britain, and apply it to Barack Obama's response to the Islamic threat that is ISIS. Never in the field of human conflict was so much harm done to so many by just one man. Now, Churchill and Obama seldom have two names in one sentence been in such contrast. There stood Churchill, a patriot with a distinguished military record. Now, I know, guys, I know the backstory about Churchill, but okay. Anyway, who wanted to take part in the invasion task force that hit the beaches of Normandy, only to be ordered not to by the King of England. The King of England says, no, you're not going to do that. Then there's Obama, who at the very least is sympathetic to the entirety of Islam and its goal of global dominance. The most damning evidence against Obama has been his mishandling of the Islamic group ISIS, the most powerful jihad against Christians since the Middle Ages. Now, I take issue a little bit here with the author, only because I don't believe it's mishandling. I think it's intentional handling. I believe that Obama and Kerry, and going back in time, Hillary Clinton, in conjunction with John Brennan, himself a Muslim, are actively engaged in supporting ISIS and through covert CIA operations. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. And if you look at ISIS, and I do believe too, and Joe, you and I have talked about this during the week, that ISIS, I believe that it's symbolic by its name. We talk about ISIS being, of course, the god of the New World Order. They worship Isis, Osiris, and if you pick up Tom Horn's books and Paul McGuire's books, you can read all about that. And by the way, here's what I'll do. I've got one copy of Paul McGuire's book, folks. To those listening tonight who really are strapped for cash, okay? And please, I'm going to take you on your word for this, okay? I will pay the postage. Joe and I will pay the postage. I'm sorry, I've got two books here. Two Paul McGuire books, A Prophecy of the Future of America. If you're strapped for cash and you have not read that book, the first two emails that I get that have your name, mailing address, we'll send them out. Joe and I will send out the first two. We'll pay the postage, we'll pay for the book, and we'll send them out to you, the first two. So send an email to director@homelandsecurityus.com or go to the website, click on my name on the left-hand side, and because we got to get these two books in the hands of people who want that information. But going back to this article, just real quick, and then I'm going to shut up and let you take it here. Again, the fact that Obama has been, and Clinton and Brennan and the entirety of Washington, and that includes the Gang of Eight, so important, folks, so important. They've been caught supporting our enemies, or ISIS, or the gods of war, shall we say, and against the Christians. This, to me, is perhaps the biggest threat, global threat, the world has ever seen. Does that mean, now, Spence One had said ISIS would not be a threat, of course, if we weren't supporting them, and I agree. But the fact is, we have supported them. We've given them the armaments. We've given them the everything. The author goes into some history, asking the question, does anyone read, or does anyone in government read history? Of course, he talks about during the French Revolution, the prominent leader who was despised for the terror that he helped instill. He was beheaded himself, and of course, remember 35 years ago, Ayatollah Khomeini's foreign minister was part of a group of radicals who overthrew the Shah. Remember that? He was executed for not being radical enough. That should have tipped us off. And then Bonnie Sauter. Remember Bonnie Sauter in the talks with Carter and such. He was not seen as religious or righteous enough, and he fled to France, where he's still sucking air today. Look, the Islamic threat is on the same path, and culmination of it to date has been ISIS, which is not a group of fundamentalists whose goal is to punish Westerners because of their presence. No, 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 no. It is a political and military powerhouse that has been fed, these aren't my words now, being fed by our Washington apparatus and led by the Muslim renegade-in-chief Barack Hussein Obama. Don't forget his middle name, Hussein. With that, Joe, I'll shut up. And you know, I feel like I was on vacation, and I was able to kick back and just enjoy the interviews and just punched in where I could. And I know that you were tied up for a little bit, but it was fun, actually.
Yeah,
Sheila
did you see
did a
this
great
story?
job. Well, go ahead.
No, she does a great job. And just like you, I don't want to, jump in and interrupt her or a guest a lot of times when she's going, because she does such a fantastic job. Once she gets going, it's always a great interview. But there's a story here about Morsi, Mohammed Morsi. His wife threatened to publish letters exposing Hillary Clinton's special relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood.
I saw that. Yeah, go ahead.
It says, former wife of Muslim Brotherhood President Mohammed Morsi has threatened to expose Hillary Clinton's special relationship, quote-unquote, with the Muslim Brotherhood. And Jihad Watch reported it, Free Republic, Gateway Pundit, a lot of other places. The wife of former Egyptian President Mohammed Morsi is the latest Muslim Brotherhood insider to threaten to expose the special relationship between Morsi, the Obama administration, and a relationship the latter insists never existed. Nalja Muhammad, Morsi's wife, is reportedly angry at some statements recently made by Hillary Clinton, including that Morsi was naive and unfit for Egyptian presidency, as reported by Arabic media. In the words of El Mogaz News, Morsi's wife is threatening to expose a special relationship between her husband and Hillary Clinton after the latter attacked the ousted president, calling him a simpleton who was unfit for presidency. Sources close to Njala confirmed that she was threatening to publish letters exchanged between Morsi and Hillary. The report continues by saying that she's accusing Hillary of denouncing her former close ally, the Brotherhood's Morsi, in an effort to foster better relationships with his successor, the current president, Sisi, even though she laments Morsi was faithful to the American administration.
When I saw that, I started poking around, and I knew you were going to bring this up tonight. I don't know why, but I just knew it. I started poking around, and guess what? Okay, if you go back, Bill and Hillary Clinton are friends with Basan Erstwani. I was going to put an adjective in front of it, thought better of it, of course. He's the chairman of the Dar el-Hijra Mosque in Falls Church, Virginia. Now, if that sounds familiar, folks, the Dar el-Hijra Mosque in Falls Church, well, that's where 3 of the 9/11 hijackers were based out of. And you might say, well, 9/11, given the inside workings of this. Well, the fingerprints of Bill and Hillary Clinton and this Erstwani are all over 9/11. You might think, well, this is a Bush-Cheney-Rumsfeld deal. These are all globalists. So look at the friendship between Bill and Hillary Clinton and Bassam Erstwani from the Dar el-Hijra Mosque. This friendship dates back to their White House days. in 2012, Billy Bob there hosted Muslim Brotherhood leader Morsi, that you referenced, at his Clinton Global Initiative conference while he was still president of Egypt at the time. Now, Obama was there speaking at the conference too, along with, guess who? Mitt Romney and other world leaders. So people who think that this is a Republican and Democrat, conservative, progressive deal entitled, they're just full of it. One more thing, and I'll let you talk, but I'm just like really, after not talking, I felt like I kind of, I don't know, I just felt like I didn't do my job tonight. But anyway, look to, in that story that you're referencing, look to Huma Abedin, the body person for Hillary Rodham Clinton, as kind of the gateway, as the key ally, the key person, the go-between between the Muslim Brotherhood sources and the Clintons, and even to some extent, a little bit, the Obama camp, by ways of maybe 2 or 3 degrees of separation. And Huma Abedin, of course, was born in 1976. Boy, does that make me feel old. And she was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan, but she moved to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia when she was 2 years old. Her father was born in part in India, but actually was cut up and became part of Pakistan. But anyway, the bottom line here, Huma Abedin, watch her very carefully. She returned to the U.S., went to George Washington University. She earned a BA. Now, while she was at George Washington University, she was given a job with Hillary working as a personal aide. And there you have it. There's where it began back in 1998. She also began to work as an assistant editor of Journal of Muslim Minority Affairs. So the bottom line is this. The White House is infested with Muslim Brotherhood affiliates, associates, and occupants. So, you're right. So threatening to expose the relationship, I bet you she could expose a lot more. Did I lose you?
Absolutely. No, okay. I'm here.
I thought maybe because we were having trouble, we lost Sheila. I'm unable to get Sheila back on the line. So we'll just continue with that.
I have a problem with your what are they called? Dramatic pauses and not knowing when to jump in anymore. Kidding. You got an email about that. It was pretty funny.
Yeah. My wife was actually teasing me about that as well. Long story, but she just said, "Can I talk now?" But anyway, oh my goodness, I actually, I don't know. It's never mind. Go ahead and continue.
There's a couple updates here on Ferguson, and then a story I have on the NSA. But the Missouri of Ferguson declared a state of emergency and put a curfew in place. And apparently this happened at least a few hours ago. If we're going to have justice, we must first have to maintain peace. Nixon said Nixon is the I believe the head of the local police there in Ferguson.
Okay.
And he said that the eyes of the world are watching. Captain Ron Johnson of the Missouri State Highway Patrol says a curfew will run from midnight to 5 a.m. local time and will be enforced through conversations, not tear gas and tanks.
Folks, how would you know what, and Joe, let me throw that question out.
And that was a quote from the captain of the Missouri State Highway Patrol.
How would you handle a curfew if it was imposed upon you? Think about that. Okay, my dramatic pauses.
What reason? I mean, if there was something, there's a few things that could legitimately be wrong that would make you want to, say there's like some serial killers on the loose or a prison break, something like that. I could see I don't know. You can't really at the same time, look what they did in Boston. Anymore, asking people to comply with something rather than forcing them to do so in certain situations, like a curfew. People have to go to work. People have to, have emergencies. People need to go to the store. There's a whole bunch of reasons people need to be out if they have to or want to. And there should be any kind of law that stops them from being able to do so. It should be a voluntary compliance type deal. And if they get stopped for being out, then they get stopped. But they shouldn't be arrested or hassled, what I would say.
Yeah, a curfew does not sit well with me in any situation. That's just my feeling. I think what we're seeing here is, once again, the run up toward various cities. Look, I don't think this is going to be contained. Go ahead.
Whether it was, whether the unrest is government, police, or agitator, or actual public started, they have had 6 days of kind of tension and somewhat a little bit of a hostile environment. I'm not saying it, like I said, you shouldn't be able to tell people that when they can and can't leave their house, but I think it should, like I said, it should be a more voluntary compliance for as a statement to the general public. If you're going to be out, understand it's dangerous out, and I mean what they've done is turned it into a nanny state. It's like swimming in areas in public places now. I've noticed in our we have a peninsula up here, and you used to be able to come up to the peninsula as long as I think they closed at dusk. They shut the gate, but you could swim anywhere in the peninsula without a lifeguard. Now they have lifeguards, and they have these cones up, and I see them hassling grown men and women, adults, mature adults, for standing in water in areas where there's no cones, and they ride around on four-wheelers. I mean, it's crazy. It's like they've turned this nanny state, or what they perceive as a nanny state. It's a police state and a nanny state at the same time, and I say that because they are trying to coddle everything that people do and saying, they're tightening down on restrictions and for freedoms, from property ownership and land use, to different situations like we see here, and they declared a state of emergency. Well, that's a step the state takes to get more power over the public and resources.
Right, exactly.
And they implemented a curfew. I mean, there's layers to this. There's what the federal government needs out of a situation, what the state government needs out of a situation, and what the local government needs. And then, I mean, there's so much in here. This is just a cesspool of distraction, really, if they don't just stop. I don't know how long this is going to go on. I'm not saying it's wrong that they shouldn't be protesting, but I don't know. It's just getting worse and worse. And now I'm looking here, one of the NSA's biggest contractors will be recording license plate numbers, and it's a company called Interrogated Defense Systems. It's a business. It's going to install a system over the next year and a half, replacing manual and electronic toll collection booths with a system that will automatically charge vehicles, and also it will remotely capture license plate numbers.
Look, Joe, I had to fight a parking ticket that was done by a remote license plate reader out of Philadelphia. And, of course, we live on the other side of the state, as far away from Philadelphia as you can get. I got a notice in the mail. It was a $75 ticket. And supposedly, and I've got the documentation, but supposedly this license plate reader read my plate and put me in Philadelphia when I was actually nowhere near Philadelphia on that date. So I contacted the Philadelphia police, or the parking authority, or it was the parking authority actually, and said, look, I was not there. This is a mistake. I had to get a sworn affidavit or a sworn statement from the person I was with, and I had to prove I wasn't there as opposed to them proving to me that I was. So imagine what this is going to bring.
Well, yeah, you're going to show up to court? You're going to go all the way down there to show up for court in person?
No. It took me a month to clear up too. I mean, a full month. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes left here, and I guess we can get into more. I saw this. The U.S. is launching more airstrikes.
Yeah, by the way, folks, I did get 2 people that did earn their way or mention about the book giveaway. The 2 people. Let me just to keep me honest here. Hang on a minute here. I'll tell you who they are, and then that way you'll. Michael P. I'm going by the first 2 I got in, and Donna K. Donna K. from Evansville, Indiana, and Michael P. from Illinois. You'll be getting your books. I'll be sending them out after the show tonight. Look for them midweek. And thank you very much. Again, the 2 Paul McGuire, Prophecy of the Future of America. We do what we can to get the word out. Of course, we've got no financial interest in the book at all. Just trying to get the word out in people's hands. All right, sir, go ahead.
Today, it said the U.S. launched more on Saturday. They launched more airstrikes in Iraq at the Islamic State, IS or ISIS, including ones targeting member of the Islamic militant group who are positioned around the country's largest dam. Apparently, they more of these Yazidi people.
Yes.
I don't understand. Is that a belief system or is that a cultural ethnic group?
Yes, the Yazidis.
Okay, yeah. I guess I don't understand. I have to look into that a little bit more to understand what it is. But apparently, ISIS has captured even more since last night. I know we reported over 80 or 90 last night of men that were killed and then women and children taken. But there's they say that there could be dozens of more Yazidi men that were massacred, and there's been more strikes from the U.S. military also, and there's a huge situation because there's a lot of people up there, and I wonder how far this is going to go before they actually step in and do something about this.
So Gerald Solani talked about that. Look, they've been living on Mount Sinjar for over a century, for crying out loud. Just for people who don't know, the Yazidis are Kurds. They're the Kurds, at least in culture, if not this ethno-religious type of group. Okay. So, but they've been living out there for 100+ years, for crying out loud. But go ahead.
No, I didn't have anything more to add on that. Other than, when are they going to... This seems to be one of the bigger humanitarian crises we've seen inside, even though Syria is going on. And that's part of this, though. That was part of this, what we're seeing today. I see Ron Paul saying, stay out of Iraq. I understand that, but isn't there an obligation to destroy something that we started or put into motion over there?
Isn't it interesting? Bush broke it.
If that was even something we were going to do.
Well, we had no damn business going into Iraq, and I before I changed, I was a big supporter because of all of the talk about Salman Pak. If you recall, the military training compound there that housed an aircraft or the body of an aircraft, and they would train terrorists in Salman Pak in Iraq. And of course, I thought, well, this is right after 9/11, so yeah, we've got the right to go into. And remember the argument about casus belli, whether or not we had the actual moral right to go into Iraq or to wage war against Iraq, and that was a big issue. And I stood on the side of the neoconservatives. Now I'm saying, boy, was I wrong. Not only that, Bush and his people broke it. Bush broke it into pieces. Obama shattered the pieces away. And now look what's happening right now. I mean, now do we have a moral obligation? I mean, what do we do?
There's an interesting report here out of from Activist Post, and it says, and this is I got this from Steve Quayle's website. Syrian Kurds, not U.S. military, rescued trapped Yazidis in Iraq. And it says, in a perfect example of how events can be misconstrued in the mainstream media outlets for propaganda purposes, recent reports regarding trapped Yazidis on Mount Sinai have been used to cover for the justification of an American bombing campaign in Iraq. And I don't know how accurate this report is, but I just came over it. But it talks about how this strikes have been presented to the American public as the reason the U.S. military is engaging in targeted airstrikes, when in fact it's to protect a hub for major international oil companies, which is not in the vicinity of Mount Shinar or Shinar.
Sinjar, but they're bombing actual. But they're bombing, Joe. They're bombing military assets instead of the people who are conducting the actual executions, raids on the Yazidis on Mount Sinjar. So, I would be more inclined to believe that article is correct, as opposed to more correct than it is not. And it does have to do with oil pipelines, and oil interests as well. That's also a secondary aspect to it.
And I read that this ISIS group, how much they're actually have been funded by oil, and they were talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And I don't know how accurate that is either. And I can't remember where I came across that or when. I think it was last week sometime. But if that's true, that's a lot of money.
Let me tell you,
$425 million is the figure that I can remember from one oil field or something along those lines from Syria or Iraq in 1 year.
Right. Of course, you had the takeover of a federal or a central bank, which would be the equivalent of one of our Federal Reserve banks in Mosul. Then you had the takeover of an oil field. Of course, they've got a lot of the infrastructure now. They've taken over a lot of the infrastructure in Iraq, ISIS. Folks, if you own a globe, it'll become outdated probably in the next few weeks. You're going to have to buy a new globe with new geographical boundaries, because the way things are, in fact, you're probably going to have to buy one with movable lines on it, the way things are going. But it's amazing how all of this is lining up with biblical prophecy. That's not a pregnant pause.
What do you think about tomorrow? Is there going to be any announcements from the president tomorrow?
Or do you think
there'll be a quiet day?
Look, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and this stems, folks, if you didn't listen to Friday's broadcast with W, he came on. It's interesting, Obama, 44th president, going to be on the ground for, by my calculations, 44 hours. And this, there's another 44 weeks to Prince William's birthday, I believe. That's from memory. I don't have my notes in front of me, but his journey to Washington tomorrow without any ostensible reason is interesting, to say the least. I don't believe anything is going to happen tomorrow, but I do believe that something might be put into motion that will happen at a later date tomorrow, or because of tomorrow. Let's keep our eyes on it. That's all I got to say. Go ahead, Joe.
No, I think you're right. I think I'd just pay attention if you have a chance to. Even the White House website has updates on if they're doing live broadcasts or feeds. I don't know. I think if they were to do some kind of, like I said, the most frequent thing I've heard this was going to be was a 5 million person amnesty executive order, which I don't see him having to come back to do that. I don't see it out of the realm of possibilities, but I don't know would they even announce. I mean, would they even make news with doing something like that? I don't know. But yeah, just keep your eyes open.
I don't know.
Pay attention.
I don't know, man.
We'll see. But we have, a minute and a half left. V and Steve Quayle will be on with us on Monday. Greg Jackson Wednesday. Paul McGuire Thursday. It's going to be a great week. And it was a great show tonight. Thanks, Sheila, and
fantastic
sorry,
Sheila. I don't know what happened. We can't reconnect with her. Of course, she did all the heavy lifting tonight. I want to thank her for that. Joe, and I just want to tell you, I want to tell everyone too, going to be putting a lot more information. Again, we're building the website hagmanandhagmann.com so you'll have all of the current audios accessible to you in a just touch of a button. Also going to be doing recaps of our programs there. And the article portion is still going to be on HomelandSecurityUS.com. And folks, if you have a chance, go to HomelandSecurityUS.com, look at the video, share that video. I know it's a little bit old. It's already got 2 million views almost, or 1.8 million. But look, it's a great video, and share that. But Joe, thanks for being with us tonight.
Absolutely. And have a good night, everyone. God bless. Stay safe, and we'll see you Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time with Steve Quayle and V. Have a good weekend, and take care.